In deep sorrow, the parents of the deceased young woman were grieving and still reeling when a police officer appeared at their doorstep and announced that their daughter was alive. So, whose dead body had they found in the car? This is the wild story of Shahraban and Khadija. And before we get started, be kind enough to support my channel. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and stay active. It will help a lot. I will be very grateful to you for that. Let's get started. The heroine of today's story is a young woman named Shahraban, whose last name was not disclosed in the media because the case took place in Germany, where there are very strict privacy laws. Shahraban was born in April 1999 in Iraq, where she spent the first years of her childhood with her sister and older brother. The girl grew up in a fairly religious family. They were part of the Yazidi religion, which combined elements of Islam, Judaism, and Nestorian Christianity. The family fled Iraq when Shahraban was still a child. Eventually, they emigrated to Germany and settled in a place called Ingolstadt, located near Munich. Shahraban, like all children, attended high school and had many friends. During her teenage years, the girl began to show a particular interest in her appearance, beauty, makeup, and hair. As she grew older, she planned to train as a makeup artist to always look flawless and stunning. Shahraban was a stereotypical representative of the Zoomer generation. She couldn't imagine her life without smartphones and gadgets and spent most of her free time on social media. She especially loved Instagram and YouTube. It could be said that she grew up watching beauty bloggers. When Shahraban first felt the power of feminine beauty, she began to change rapidly, becoming a more outgoing and confident person. The girl loved being the center of attention and, over time, became a real problem for her religious parents. Undoubtedly, Shahraban was a rebel. She could leave home late at night without saying a word to her family. She would simply get dressed and disappear. Her mother and father had no idea where their daughter was or when she would return home. For the girl at that time, the main thing was to go against her parents' rules. Shahraban also had a habit of dramatizing everything. She was one of those people who could blow up a scandal out of nothing. Sometimes the schoolgirl acted provocatively just to attract strangers' attention. She could date several guys at once just to emphasize her popularity. But everything changed when the girl met a young man named Rowan. She was 16, and Rowan was a year older. His family had also emigrated from Iraq to Germany when he was still a child. The first meeting between Rowan and Shahraban was fateful, but after a few dates, they literally couldn't tear themselves away from each other, spending all their free time together. At the same time, the couple kept their relationship a secret, not wanting their families to judge them. However, a year later, their secret was revealed. Shahraban's uncle accidentally stumbled upon the couple as they were kissing near the subway. The sight infuriated the man. He shouted at Rowan to keep his hands off his niece, then snatched the phone from the young man's hands and began scrolling through the photo gallery. Coming across pictures of the lovers posing for selfies in each other's arms, the uncle grew even more enraged. He scrolled through the photos and realized that his niece had been romantically involved with the young man for quite some time. He yelled at Rowan that Shahraban was still too young to date guys, and he, as a man, should have understood that. Instead of going to the relatives and telling everyone, the uncle acted differently. He began blackmailing his niece, threatening to tell her parents if she didn't do everything he wanted. The girl, fearing her father's reaction, agreed to carry out some minor errands for her uncle. The situation itself caused significant stress for Shahraban. She wasn't used to submitting to anyone's will, even if it was an older relative, and this, in turn, affected her relationship with Rowan. For a long time, gritting their teeth, they both complied with the uncle's demands until they finally got fed up. The lovers decided to make their romance public to escape the blackmail. Once everyone knew, there was simply nothing left to blackmail her with. At first, all the close relatives were outraged, both Shahraban's parents and Rowan's parents. They believed their children were too young to date, that relationships between a man and a woman were a serious responsibility. Both families demanded that the lovers break up, The headstrong girl and the matured young man defied their elders' demands. They continued dating. 2 years later, when Shahraban turned 18 and Rowan was 20, they got married and moved into their own apartment. The newlyweds finally felt free from their parents' control, so for a while they enjoyed happiness, a complete sense of freedom and married life. Everything was wonderful. Now they could be together without fear of being caught hugging or kissing. But married life is not just fun, love, and romance. It's also responsibilities toward each other. The honeymoon passed in bliss, and then Rowan opened his own barbershop. Shahraban began working as a cosmetologist in a salon. She performed cosmetic injections and laser facial treatments. The young woman was living her dream. She had always wanted to work in the beauty industry, and now her wish had come true. Just a year after the wedding, their marriage went downhill, and the relationship became toxic. Shahraban seemed to remain a rebellious teenager, always looking for a reason to start a scandal. Now, toward her husband, she behaved the same way she had with her parents when she lived under their roof. She was a manipulator and an intriguer. The woman could disappear without telling her husband where she was going. She could suddenly lash out at Rowan, slap him, and then take offense herself. There was one notable incident when Shahraban stormed into a bakery next to her husband's barbershop and started throwing pastries at Rowan. On top of that, Shahraban became incredibly jealous. She couldn't bear the thought that her husband was surrounded by women at work who, in her mind, were dying to ruin her marriage. She constantly screamed and cried about how she didn't trust her husband because of his alleged affairs, which, by the way, never existed. Shahraban was prone to dramatics, and over the years, her theatrical tendencies only worsened. The pandemic began, and the couple was forced into isolation, spending 24 hours a day in the same space. One might think the relationship would deteriorate, but that didn't happen. When there were no external irritants, Shahraban calmed down a bit, and for a while, everything was fine. But when the quarantine was lifted and restrictions were eased, 21-year-old Shahraban immediately took her driving test and bought her first car. It was a black Mercedes. As soon as the car entered her life, her relationship with Rowan began to fall apart completely. For Shahraban, it wasn't just a car, it symbolized freedom. The woman began disappearing from home even more often, sometimes in the middle of the night without saying a word. She would just get into her Mercedes and drive off. She could go anywhere and not return home. Shahraban repeatedly cheated on her husband with different men until she eventually got pregnant by one of them. At that time, the girl was 22, and the pregnancy came as a surprise to everyone involved. The details of the affair became known to Rowan, and now it was he who threw a fit. A serious argument erupted between the spouses, and the situation escalated by the minute. The man, as expected, was outraged by his wife's behavior, but she didn't care. Shahraban felt no emotions about it. She had no remorse, nothing. But it was she who attacked her husband with her fists, as if he had cheated on her. Of course, she was in the wrong, and this made her even more cruel toward her husband. The woman hit him on the head with a heavy object, smashed his face into a mirror with all her strength. Shahraban even tried to run him over with her beloved car. The self-absorbed woman, who never took responsibility, was furious because Rowan didn't want his wife to be pregnant by another man. It's unknown how it would have ended if Rowan's brother hadn't intervened and threatened Shahraban. He insisted that she terminate the pregnancy. And the woman finally gave in to her brother-in-law's demands. However, the tension in the relationship didn't subside. The emotional and physical abuse only continued to worsen. Shahraban now felt immense contempt, not only for her husband, but also for her brother-in-law. She blamed him for having to get rid of the child. One day, the situation escalated so much that Shahraban grabbed a stun gun, burst into the relative's house, and shocked him in the neck. The brother-in-law collapsed to the floor screaming, while the aggressor just smiled widely and shouted maliciously, "Yes! Yes!" After this attack, Shahraban and Rowan's marriage fell apart completely. The man obtained a restraining order against his wife, and they began discussing separation. During the divorce process, Shahraban moved back in with her parents. However, her mother and father, who had desperately opposed her marriage to her chosen partner, were now against the divorce. They believed that if she parted ways with her husband, it would bring shame to their entire family. They worried that they would face public ostracism. People would turn away from them, so they insisted that the couple reconcile. Shahraban and Rowan's parents forced their children into a mediation process. The goal of marriage mediation is to help the parties resolve the conflict independently and reach a peaceful agreement. That is, not to divorce immediately, but to try to work things out and stay together or reach some kind of agreement. Both families were present at the process, and both were against the divorce. But emotions ran so high that Shahraban's father began threatening Rowan's father with violence. Everyone blamed each other until they came to the common conclusion that mediation had failed and divorce was indeed the best solution in the situation. The couple simply had no ability or desire to stay together. Surprisingly, after the divorce, finding herself alone, Shahraban felt completely lost. She didn't know what to do or where to go because her parents didn't want her in their home, and she was divorced from her husband. Instead of renting an apartment, the woman simply lived in hotels, sometimes sleeping in her car, moving from place to place. She began hanging out in shady places and associating with risky people. Shahraban became addicted to illegal substances and engaged in unlawful activities. The divorced woman started committing petty thefts, stealing food and money from nearby stores, selling fake COVID-19 test certificates. There was even a time when she kept explicit images of minors on her phone. In short, the life of the once successful and happy girl spiraled into the abyss at breakneck speed. While associating with criminals, Shahraban told them stories about her tragic fate. She claimed that after the divorce, her ex-husband's family threatened to harm her, that Rowan was stalking and intimidating her. Naturally, it was all a pile of lies. There was no evidence that anyone had threatened her. Shahraban made it all up to gain pity and incite revenge. Fortunately, most of the men she seduced clearly understood what she was leading up to and categorically refused to take up arms and carry out retribution against her ex-husband's family. But eventually, someone agreed to fulfill Shahraban's request, a man nicknamed Vulcan, and that's when the first criminal plan began to unfold. The main potential victim was none other than Rowan's brother. Shahraban still held a grudge against her husband's relative, blaming him for the loss of her child and wanting revenge. Vulcan, without asking unnecessary questions, said that killing the guy would be easier for him than blowing out a candle. For his work, he demanded 10,000 euros, 5,000 as an advance, and 5,000 after the job was done. The client, in turn, demanded that the hitman show no mercy and send her photos of the deed as proof. Vulcan grabbed a gun and mimicked how he would send the future victim to the other side. So Shahraban paid Vulcan 5,000 euros in advance and sat waiting for good news that her enemy was gone, that he had died in agony, begging for mercy. However, time passed, and no photos were sent. In reality, Vulcan wasn't a hitman and had no intention of killing anyone. It was yet another scam by a petty crook. He had just swindled the woman out of 5,000 euros. After such a grandiose failure, Shahraban felt depressed, angry, and foolish. But she wasn't about to abandon her deadly plan. Now she wanted to take an even more perverse path. Around the same time, Shahraban met a man named Shakir, her age. He was also 23 years old. Acquaintances described Shakir as a friendly and calm person, except when it came to white powder, as illegal substances made the guy very aggressive. He also had a particular weakness for the opposite sex. Shakir allowed women to bend him to their will, which Shahraban really liked. The young people hit it off instantly, and nights spent under the same blanket brought them even closer. After a few weeks of dating, the young woman brought up her favorite topic. Shahraban started spouting her usual nonsense about being in danger, that her ex-husband was stalking her and wanted to kill her, that his entire family was plotting to harm her, and then she asked Shakir if he was ready to commit a bloody crime for her sake. Wanting to impress her, the young man said yes. Only this time, Shahraban targeted her ex-husband himself. She didn't want to take his life. The woman decided to make it so that he and his family would regret how they treated her for the rest of their lives. In short, Shahraban wanted to stage her own death and frame her ex-husband, making it look like it was his doing. A more absurd plan was hard to imagine. Shahraban told Shakir that she wanted to run away with him somewhere far from her past and her family, who forced her to live by their rules. But to escape her aggressive and ruthless husband, she needed to make it look like she was dead. When Rowan went to prison for the murder of his ex-wife, Shahraban would be completely free. Years of torment and humiliation would finally end, and she could breathe freely next to her beloved. These were the fairy tales the woman told her new boyfriend at night. Shahraban came up with the brilliant idea of finding a dead body that looked exactly like her. Without thinking about the existence of DNA, the woman set out to find her doppelganger, kill her, and pin the blame on her ex-husband. And now, the case took a mad and deadly turn. Over the next few weeks, Shahraban created a bunch of fake social media profiles just to find a girl who looked exactly like her. She scrolled through page after page of different strangers, comparing facial contours, body types, height, and weight. She tried to learn everything about these girls to find a more accurate copy of herself. Shahraban even wrote down a requirement, a small checklist that candidates had to meet. They had to be around 22-23 years old, about 160-170 centimeters tall, with brown eyes and no tattoos or distinguishing marks on their skin. In the end, Shahraban compiled a short list of people who, in her opinion, looked the most like her. Then she followed all the profiles of potential doppelgangers using fake accounts and struck up friendly correspondence with them. In reality, Shahraban had no intention of making friends. Her goal was to learn about the plans and dreams of her copies, to later pull the right strings. It turned out that most of the girls on the shortlist desperately wanted to become influencers in the beauty industry or simply become famous. Shahraban decided to use this to her advantage and started posing as model agency directors and salon managers. The perpetrator invited young beauties to work for her. She had several different fraudulent schemes, but in most cases, Shahraban simply greeted them and introduced herself as some significant figure in the beauty industry, then invited the girls either as models or as clients for free cosmetic procedures at home for advertising purposes. Sometimes Shahraban promised substantial rewards or invited the girls to participate in a music video. It's clear that no money or videos were actually planned. She just needed to see them in person. For the most part, naive students, unaccustomed to the attention of producers, jumped at the chance to become famous, earn easy money, and fulfill their dreams. In total, Shahraban contacted about 20 candidates for the role of her doppelganger, and many of them were interested in the offer. However, upon learning that they would have to travel to Munich, most of the girls ultimately refused. Shahraban was on the verge of giving up. She was no longer so sure her plan would work, until one day she connected with a beauty blogger named Khadija from Heilbronn, located in the neighboring state of Baden-Württemberg. Khadija was 23 years old, the same age as Shahraban. The girl had a very difficult childhood. Khadija was born in Algeria, but after her parents' scandalous divorce, she emigrated to Germany with her father, leaving her mother in Algeria. She never saw her mother again. When the girl was 14, her father lost custody, and she was taken to an orphanage where she made many good friends. Soon, Khadija got her first boyfriend, who turned out to be very cruel. Then, at a fairly young age, the girl became pregnant, but ultimately lost the child. Later, She was subjected to harassment by an older man. In short, by the age of 23, she had experienced more pain than some people do in a lifetime. Despite the hardships she endured, Khadija didn't give up. She was described as a vibrant, cheerful, loving young woman. She was extremely loyal to her friends from the orphanage, whom she considered her sisters. At the time, Khadija worked as a waitress but dreamed of becoming the face of some cosmetics brand. She was obsessed with the beauty industry, followed famous beauty bloggers online, and even started posting her own tutorial videos on TikTok. In August 2022, a stranger posing as a music producer contacted Khadija and made a stunning offer to collaborate. The girl's life turned upside down in an instant. She couldn't even dream of such an opportunity. The only thing she didn't know was that Shahraban wasn't who she claimed to be. More precisely, the woman used one of her fake profiles with a different name. The offer for Khadija was as follows. She was invited to shoot a music video for Luna, a well-known German singer and rapper. This was a real musician, not just some randomly made-up character. Luna is a German singer and rapper. Her real name is Meylan Ghafouri. She was originally from Iraqi Kurdistan and moved to Germany with her parents as refugees. Khadija couldn't believe her luck and did something Shahraban hadn't expected at all. She directly contacted Luna on social media and sent her a voice message asking about the music video shoot. To her surprise, Luna responded. The singer wrote that Khadija had likely fallen victim to a scammer because no auditions for a music video were being held. By responding to the girl, Luna effectively saved her life. Unfortunately, Shahraban wasn't about to give up. Now she wrote to Khadija from another fake profile and tried to lure her into a different scam. This time, the woman offered a free laser procedure at her salon in exchange for posting reviews on social media. Shahraban used her usual scam targeting beauty influencers, and Khadija fell for it again, thinking it was a great opportunity to gain fame. Shahraban explained in detail what needed to be done and gave the address of a real salon owned by her ex-husband, Rowan. Since Khadija lived 160 kilometers from the salon, Shahraban was afraid the girl would refuse, so she promised to personally pick her up and take her to the location. The meeting was scheduled for August 16, 2022. The mastermind of the scam was staying with her parents at the time. Early in the morning, the woman put on a whole performance for her family, telling them she was going to meet her ex-husband Rowan to settle matters after the divorce. She promised to be home by lunch. Of course, it was all planned in advance. On August 16th, Shahraban set out very early. By 3 in the afternoon, she still hadn't returned. Not an hour later, not 2, not 3. By 10 in the evening, her parents grew worried. Their daughter had gone to meet her ex-husband in the morning, and there had been no calls or messages from her, though she promised not to be late. Relatives tried calling Shahraban and messaging her on social media, but there was no response. By 11 at night, her mother and father got into the car and headed to Rowan's house, her ex-husband, to find out where their daughter was and why she wasn't answering calls or messages. But on the way there, the parents noticed Shahraban's black car on one of the residential streets. It was their daughter's car, the one she had driven off in that morning for the meeting. They immediately rushed to the Mercedes to see what had happened, but through the heavily tinted windows, they could only make out a female body lying on the back seat, covered in blood. In a panic, the father tried to break the window with a stick he found, as the car was locked, but the dry branch broke on the first hit. Meanwhile, Shahraban's mother, with trembling fingers, called an ambulance and the police. Law enforcement officers arrived at the scene quickly and got to work. They managed to open the car, and that's when the parents' worst fears were confirmed. Because their daughter Shahraban, lying on the back seat of her beloved Mercedes, was no longer breathing. The young woman had received over 50 stab wounds all over her body. Her face was particularly affected. It was completely disfigured. The arriving paramedics only confirmed the harsh reality. Shahraban was dead. The parents burst into tears. They were in complete shock from what they saw. Though Shahraban had caused them plenty of trouble, they loved their daughter. The police immediately began an investigation, trying to figure out who could have committed this brutal, cold-blooded murder. And that's when the mother and father played their assigned role. They told the detectives that their daughter had gone that morning to meet her ex-husband, Rowan. During their married life, the spouses often argued and could easily get into fights. They had a very messy divorce, with threats and violence from both sides. So it was quite logical that Rowan became suspect number one. The police immediately set out to find the man, but it turned out he had fled. Hearing from friends that his ex-wife had been killed, Rowan hurried to escape, knowing that the investigators would first suspect him of the murder. Naturally, for the police, this looked almost like a confession of guilt. The day after, before Rowan was caught, the media reported on the horrific incident in which Shahraban had died. The news stated that a young 23-year-old woman was found in her car with multiple stab wounds. After the report aired in the media, local residents began calling the police, claiming they had seen Shahraban that very day. And it wasn't just one person calling, but several. This definitely threw the investigators off and made them think. The authorities decided to expedite the autopsy of the victim, as well as conduct a DNA test and take fingerprints, even though the parents had already identified her. The results of the examination revealed that the deceased was not the owner of the black Mercedes where she was found. Imagine the emotions Shahraban's family experienced. For a whole day, they were crushed by grief, believing their daughter was dead. And not just dead, but killed with extreme cruelty. The mother and father were completely at a loss. It was as if they had ended up in a parallel reality. Who was the girl found in their daughter's car? And if Shahraban was alive, where was she? Why was her car abandoned on the street? There were more questions than answers. Meanwhile, the authorities had to determine the identity of the unidentified victim. Since everything happened in Shahraban's car, she now became the main suspect. The police appealed to the public with a request to report any missing girls who matched Shahraban's description. Within a few hours of the announcement, they received a flood of reports. One of them was about Khadija, who lived about 160 kilometers from the crime scene and, as it turned out, hadn't returned home the previous day. Soon, with the help of DNA analysis, it was confirmed that the victim found in the back seat of the Mercedes was actually Khadija. This meant that Shahraban had carried out her horrific, despicable plan to eliminate her doppelganger. So, on August 15, 2022, the day before the scheduled date, Shahraban wrote to her new boyfriend, Shakir, that they had a lot to do tomorrow because they needed to carry out what they had previously agreed on. In the next message, she offered him 80,000 euros to kill Khadija, and Shakir agreed. Early in the morning on August 16th, while at her parents' house, Shahraban convinced her father and mother that she was going to meet her ex-husband. In reality, she got into the car, picked up Shakir, and the two of them set off on a long journey to pick up Khadija. At the time, the girl thought she had been invited for free cosmetic procedures and was eagerly waiting for them to pick her up. Shahraban and Shakir arrived at the future victim's house around 7 in the evening. The woman knocked on the door and introduced herself as the salon owner. The kind and trusting Khadija didn't suspect a thing. She genuinely thought she was going to a beauty salon, so she got into the car without hesitation. The time on the road passed quickly. It was already dark outside when Shahraban turned into a nearby forest, pretending to be lost. She asked Khadija to get out of the car and check for any road signs. After the girl stepped out of the vehicle, Shakir jumped out after her and hit her on the back of the head with brass knuckles. From the sudden blow, Khadija collapsed to the ground. The man pulled out a knife and began stabbing her in the chest, neck, back, and especially the face. His goal was not only to kill the doppelganger, but to completely disfigure her appearance so that no one would doubt that it was Shahraban who had died. In total, Shakir inflicted 56 stab wounds on Khadija. It was madness to take a person's life for a woman he had known for only a few weeks. Naturally, after such a brutal attack, the girl died. By agreeing to a free procedure to advance her career, Khadija could never have imagined she would pay for it with her life. She trusted people, and they took advantage of her, sending her to the other side in the most horrific way imaginable. Then, Shahraban and Shakir placed Khadija's body in the back seat of the Mercedes, drove to a street near Rowan's house, and simply abandoned the car so that her worried parents would find the dead body, thinking it was their daughter. On August 17, 2022, when the police identified the victim, the owner of the Mercedes, Shahraban, became the main suspect. She had failed one crucial part of her grandiose plan. After committing the crime, she didn't flee the city as planned. Many local residents saw the woman alive when the news reported her tragic death. That's why the police were flooded with calls. After Shahraban had an innocent girl killed, she continued living her normal life. She was seen walking around the local shopping mall. She went into stores and made everyday purchases, confident that she would get away with it. On the evening of August 19, 2022, Shahraban had the audacity to walk into a local pizzeria and ask an employee for a phone. She was captured on surveillance cameras. Even more incredible was that the woman was wearing the clothes of the deceased Khadija and using her handbag, which she had stolen from her. The pizzeria owner recognized Shahraban's face from the news, so he secretly called the police and she was arrested. The authorities also managed to detain Shakir because he was there too. In January 2024, 18 months after the murder, the trial finally took place, and the case made headlines in international newspapers. It became known as the doppelganger murder. The public was shocked that Shahraban had taken the life of an innocent young woman because of her physical resemblance, just to frame her ex-husband. It sounded like the fictional plot of a detective thriller. At the start of the trial, it became clear that this malicious pair had committed numerous despicable acts while in prison. Shahraban constantly fought with her cellmates. She was accused of causing bodily harm. Shakir was caught trying to arrange the murder of 13 witnesses who were supposed to testify at the trial. He offered another inmate a large sum of money to eliminate that many people, which would help cover up Shakir's original crime. Of course, this didn't go unpunished. None of the witnesses were harmed, and their number actually increased by that time. One of the witnesses was Shahraban's ex-husband, Rowan, who had been in hiding for the past year and a half out of fear of ending up in prison for a crime he didn't commit. The man was afraid that his ex-wife's parents would track him down and try to take revenge. Rowan told the court about his relationship with Shahraban during their years of marriage and her aggressive behavior. Another prosecution witness was the would-be hitman nicknamed Vulcan, whom the woman had wanted to hire to kill her ex-husband's brother-in-law. Ironically, this turned against him, as the authorities later charged Vulcan with fraud and sentenced him to 1 year of probation. During the trial, many different theories were discussed to explain why Shahraban did it. One of the proposed versions was that Khadija was killed as part of some magical ritual related to a love potion, as a bunch of strange papers with love spells were found in the defendant's car, but this theory was quickly dismissed. In the end, Shahraban herself testified in court, speaking in a quiet, timid voice, trying to appear as an innocent victim of circumstances. She insisted she was incapable of such a thing and blamed everything on her new boyfriend, Shakir. The woman claimed she had no idea what her boyfriend had planned that evening. During the car ride, he also threatened her with a knife if she dared to disobey him. However, Shahraban's story didn't hold up under scrutiny, as there was plenty of evidence refuting it. The trial dragged on until December 2024. There were many pauses and delays, but in the end, Shahraban and Shakir were found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. The main victim of today's tragedy was a young woman named Khadija. She was a sweet, caring person and was sincerely devoted to her friends, especially those she considered sisters. They, in turn, organized a fundraiser to cover Khadijah's funeral expenses. She was taken too soon. She was only 23 years old. Can this tragic death serve as a lesson for naive girls, a warning not to trust messages on social media from strangers? You never know who is really hiding behind a cute avatar and what their true intentions actually are. If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video. On November 1st, 1993, the small community of Middletown, Connecticut, was shaken when it learned of a brutal massacre. 2 people were beaten, shot, and mercilessly stabbed in the kitchen of their own home. As the truth came to light, the case took on an even more mysterious air. And before we get started, be kind enough to support my channel. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and stay active. It will help a lot. I will be very grateful to you for that. Let's get started. Patricia Lynn was born on October 20th, 1950, to Arthur and Ruth Vanderkamp. She was one of 7 children. Their large, close-knit family lived in a small town in a rural area near the Vermont border. Her father, Arthur, passed away when Lynn was only 6 years old. Thanks to the warm and friendly atmosphere in the family, they managed to overcome this devastating loss. Soon after graduating high school at the age of 19, Lynn married Robert Howard Steller, known to everyone as Bob. They met in school. Bob, who was 22, was a couple of years ahead of Lynn, but the young couple began dating after Steller graduated high school. In May 1973, Lynn and Bob welcomed their first child. When the child grew older, the couple moved to the resort town of Old Orchard Beach in southwestern Maine. In February 1981, their family was struck by a terrible tragedy. Their 7-year-old son was hit by a school bus while crossing the street. This heart-wrenching incident happened right before his mother's eyes. The pain and grief of the boy's parents were indescribable. No one should have to bury their child. The devastating loss profoundly affected Lynn. The grieving mother began drinking heavily to drown her sorrow in alcohol. However, alcohol could not bring her son back. It only made things worse. Over time, Lynn found the strength to start her journey to sobriety. She even began attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. Exactly 2 years after the loss of their first child, the Stellers had another chance to become a happy family. In February 1983, their second son, Matthew Collin, was born. Of course, he could not replace the son they lost, but he undoubtedly became a light that brightened the life of his grief-stricken mother. Unfortunately, by that time, the relationship between the spouses had already deteriorated, and soon Lynn and Bob's marriage fell apart. They continued to communicate and co-parent their child until Bob remarried. When Matthew turned 7, Lynn made the important decision to move to Middletown, Connecticut. Her son stayed with Bob and his wife. The boy was in school, and his parents did not want to subject him to additional stress. Moreover, the environment at his father's home was more stable, so Lynn decided to settle into her new place before bringing her son to live with her. She remained actively involved in Matthew's life. The 2 cities were about 3.5 hours apart by car, and the mother planned to see her child often. Soon after the move, 39-year-old Lynn got a job as a mechanic in the maintenance department at Wesleyan University, one of America's most prestigious private universities. Despite being far from her family, Steller considered Middletown the perfect place for a fresh start. The town had about 43,000 residents. It had a relaxed atmosphere. The demographic diversity was well suited for a lively college town, which also boasted a low crime rate. The university where Lynn worked had a reputation as one of the best liberal arts colleges in New England, a region in the northeastern United States. Nearly 4,000 students studied there. To distract herself from dark thoughts, Lynn took up furniture restoration, upholstery, and woodworking in her spare time. It was while working on one such order that she met 24-year-old Gina Coxia. Gina became Lynn's first close friend in Connecticut. It started with casual conversation. They quickly hit it off, exchanged phone numbers, and kept in touch from a distance. Soon, the girls began communicating like close friends. Their bond grew so strong that at some point, they both realized there might be something much deeper than just friendship. Eventually, a passionate romance sparked. In April 1993, Lynn and Gina became a couple. Neither the 18-year age difference, nor the gossip of those around them, nor the likelihood that other family members disapproved of their union could stop them. The women wanted the whole world to know how happy they were together. For Gina, this was her second experience with a non-traditional relationship. For Lynn, it was the first time she felt attracted to a woman. Just 4 months after graduating college, Gina and her charming Pomeranian moved into the house where Lynn lived. The residence was a 2-level apartment with 4 bedrooms in a quiet, upscale neighborhood close to the campus where Stellar worked. The woman rented this apartment from one of the college's employees. Later, Lynn and Gina's company was joined by another person. This was Stellar's nephew, 25-year-old Ronald Howard King, or Ronnie, as his loved ones called him. Ronnie was born in September 1967. As a child, he was very close to Lynn's first son, who died under the wheels of the bus. Now, for her second son, Matthew, Ronald became a true role model. King was a good guy, handsome, modest, and very calm. He always treated his family and loved ones with great care. By the time Ronnie moved into Lynn and Gina's home, he was dedicating many hours to wrestling training, as he was preparing to become a professional wrestler. After moving to Middletown, the young man worked odd jobs at various local restaurants until his aunt got him a position in the maintenance department at Wesleyan University, where she worked. Lynn and Gina often invited friends to their home, and they were valued in the community for their hard work and kindness. Colleagues spoke of them only positively. When a fire broke out in the campus dormitory and several affected students were left literally on the street, the women, without hesitation, offered their apartment as temporary housing. Life in the house could certainly be called happy. Gina and Ronnie, being close in age, got along wonderfully. Matthew spent almost the entire summer with his mother in Connecticut and returned to his father in Maine only in the fall. Everything was going perfectly until one day a horrific tragedy struck. On the morning of November 1st, 1993, 43-year-old Lynn and 26-year-old Ronnie, as usual, went to work at Wesleyan University. Before leaving, Stellar, as was her habit, deleted old messages from the home answering machine to avoid missing anything important while they were away. That day, Gina, leaving for work, put her little dog in a crate and, as usual, checked all the windows and doors of the house to make sure they were securely locked. It was the day after Halloween, so there was still a hint of the eerie atmosphere from the previous night in the air. But what happened next turned this day into a true nightmare. Around 5:30 p.m., Gina returned home and saw Lynn's car parked in the garage. That meant Lynn and Ronnie should already be home, as their shift had ended almost 2 hours earlier. However, the rooms were unusually quiet and no lights were on. Gina called out to her loved ones by name, but there was no response. The woman made her way to the kitchen in the dark and suddenly tripped over something on the floor. When she finally turned on the light, a horrifying scene appeared before her. There was blood everywhere, or something that looked very much like it. At first, Gina thought Lynn and Ronnie had decided to prank her, being late with their Halloween jokes. They were lying face down on the floor in a red puddle. Both were still in their coats and work uniforms. At first, Gina couldn't understand what was bothering her about the scene until her gaze settled on the fabric of Lynn's coat, torn into several pieces. A chill ran down her spine. With each second, it seemed less and less like a joke. Her friend was unlikely to ruin her clothes for a silly prank. A wave of fear washed over Gina. Only now did the full horror of the situation hit her. Before her lay the bodies of two of her closest friends. The young woman began to scream, but her voice broke. She rushed to Lynn and started shaking her, demanding that she stop scaring her. Then she turned to Ronnie. Gina still couldn't accept the fact that she was in a house with two dead people. It just couldn't be true. When her eyes began to take in the rest of the kitchen, she saw that the blood wasn't only on the floor. The walls, table, and kitchen cabinets were also splattered with red. Trying to look at the situation through a detective's eyes, Gina noticed that Lynn and Ronnie had been ambushed as soon as they entered the house. They didn't even have time to change out of their work clothes. On the floor near the bodies lay a knife with a long blade, covered in blood up to the handle. Nearby were shards of a ceramic vase and broken glass lamps. Gina tried desperately to understand what had happened. The woman rushed to the phone to call 911, but something was wrong with the device. In a complete panic, she ran outside and headed to the neighbor's house. Soon, law enforcement officers arrived. Upon learning what had happened, they called for backup and tried to secure the crime scene. Approaching the house, they noticed blood splattered even on the front door and the staircase to the second floor, located right in front of the kitchen. Lynn and Ronnie had been dead for nearly 2 hours, judging by the condition of their bodies. While the officers waited for the experts to arrive, they stood in the kitchen near the bodies, wondering who could have committed such a horrific attack. The house was completely silent. Suddenly, a click sounded. An electronic voice ominously announced that the phone's memory was full. It was the answering machine on the kitchen counter. It was like a message from beyond. The arriving experts discovered that the phone line in the house had been cut. Several knives were missing from the wooden stand in the kitchen. Bullet casings were also found on the floor. One of the knives lay next to a Halloween candy bowl. Another was on the floor, and a third knife was left on the living room table. All of them were stained with something resembling blood. Judging by the various drops leading outside, the perpetrator had also been injured during this brutal attack. The trail ended near the road. It's possible that a car was waiting for the assailant, helping them escape the crime scene. Based on this theory, law enforcement alerted all hospitals in the state to contact the police if anyone sought medical attention for knife wounds. A sample of the suspected perpetrator's blood was taken for analysis, but it's worth noting that this was 1993, when DNA databases were practically non-existent. For this reason, investigators had to rely on other evidence and witness statements. While the labs worked on the evidence, detectives interviewed neighbors. Since nothing was stolen from the house, a botched burglary was immediately ruled out as a motive. However, none of the residents of nearby houses heard or saw anything. No gunshots, no screams, no injured person. There were no suspects in the case, except for Gina Cochia, who had discovered the bodies. First, when the authorities arrived at the scene, the woman herself was covered in blood. Second, she mentioned that she had locked her dog in a crate before leaving that morning. This wasn't unusual, but her precautions slightly alarmed the detectives. Gina insisted to the police that she had been at work all day, but her alibi still needed verification. Cochia's clothes and car were seized for forensic examination, and she was suspected of attacking Lynn and Ronnie. Detectives, learning about the relationships in the Stellar household, hypothesized that a love triangle might have formed among the three. Gina and Ronnie, who were almost the same age, could have started a secret romance behind Lynn's back. When the woman found out, a scandal could have erupted among the lovers, ending in tragedy. It was still unclear who attacked first, but the investigators were trying to figure it out as quickly as possible. The detectives working on the case analyzed the evidence and crime scene details and concluded that more than one person must have been involved in the attack. To overpower two victims, including Ronnie, who was a wrestler, would have required either additional strength or incredible speed. The attack, it seemed, took place in the kitchen. This was confirmed by the blood splattered on the walls and furniture. The rest of the rooms were untouched. 10 different fingerprints were found at the scene, but no traces of the attacker were left on the knives or the broken lamp. A bloody shoe print from an unknown person was also found on the floor. The shoe size didn't match any of the house's residents. In addition to the broken lamp, shards of a clay vase were scattered on the kitchen floor. On November 2, 1993, after the police informed Lynn and Ronnie's family of the tragic news, they arrived in Middletown to meet with the investigators. The relatives, having lost 2 family members at once, were deeply shaken and overwhelmed with grief. They unanimously claimed that neither Ronnie nor Lynn had any enemies or ill-wishers. Some immediately suspected Gina. Apparently, they had never come to terms with the fact that Lynn had started a relationship with a woman. Fortunately for Gina, the police ruled her out as a suspect after verifying her alibi. They had no evidence linking her to the crime. Kokshia was released. It was a very difficult time for her. She mourned the loss of her beloved partner and roommate, with whom she got along so well. At the same time, people considered her guilty of their deaths. The young woman could no longer stay in the house where the tragedy occurred and hurried back to her family in another state. The autopsy revealed that Ronnie King had been shot. The young man received 3 shots to the chest and abdomen, after which he was stabbed 6 times. Additionally, he had been struck on the head with a heavy blunt object, likely the clay vase. Lynn Steller received 14 stab wounds to her face, neck, chest, and back. Some of the injuries were inflicted while the woman was already on the floor. There was also a mark on her head from a blow with a heavy object. It was likely caused by the lamp. Before that, Lynn had been shot several times, leaving her with virtually no chance of survival. The brutality with which the blows were struck suggested that the crime might have been personal. The stab wounds directly to her face indicated that the assailant clearly wanted to disfigure her. The coroner suggested that both Lynn and Ronnie died slowly, suffering intense pain in their final moments. They lay on the kitchen floor for at least 10 minutes after the attack ended. The cause of death was multiple injuries and massive blood loss. Investigators worked diligently to piece together the events leading up to the attack. It turned out that Lynn and Ronnie had left work around 3:30 p.m. Driving their usual route, they entered the house. Detectives were certain this was not a random act of violence, that at least one of the assailants was acquainted with one of the victims, as the crime clearly had a personal motive. The attackers used multiple methods to take the lives of Ronnie and Lynn. When investigators questioned residents of the neighborhood where the victims rented their home, a witness recalled seeing a couple, a man and a woman, walking near Steller's residence that day. They were clearly from another area. The man was dressed in tight jeans and wore something like a cap on his head. The woman had shoulder-length dark hair and a tanned face. She wore an unbuttoned pastel yellow windbreaker or hoodie and corduroy jeans. The witness noticed their clothing because it didn't match the weather. It was cold outside. Given the time of year, most people were wearing coats and warm jackets. The witness was also struck by how the woman kept her right hand in her pocket, holding it with her left hand, as if trying to hide something. On November 4th, Middletown investigators contacted the police department in Vermont, where Gina Kokshia was from, and asked for assistance. Detectives methodically called Lynn and Ronnie's acquaintances to rule out possible theories and gather as much information about the victims as possible. In the house where the tragedy occurred, one of the detectives found Steller's personal notebook with phone numbers and addresses. In the contact list on the last page, there was a name, Janet, and a phone number, clearly written in haste. Next to it was a Vermont phone number. State authorities were able to determine who it belonged to. The number was registered to 47-year-old Janet Griffin, a friend of Gina Kokshia. When the police visited her to ask some questions, the woman was very surprised. She explained that she had met Lynn through Gina when they hung out together. Janet was completely bewildered. She knew her friend was very happy with Steller but had no idea who might want to harm them. At the time, Griffin was doing everything she could to provide emotional support to Gina. However, she didn't know Lynn very well, so she couldn't provide any information. Still, The detectives needed to rule out every person in Lynn's phone book, so they asked Janet about her whereabouts on November 1st, 1993. Griffin said she worked as a senior housekeeper at an exclusive ski resort, but that day was her day off, so she went shopping with her colleague, Gordon Fruin. Investigators noted that Janet matched some of the witnesses' descriptions. Moreover, they noticed several cuts on her right palm and pinky finger. Her claim that she was with a male colleague that day only heightened the police's suspicions. Janet explained that she had cut her hand while trying to unscrew a light bulb from a lampshade. The woman was willing to provide a blood sample for analysis and insisted she had nothing to do with what happened at Steller's house. After the conversation with Griffin, the officers met with her colleague, 31-year-old Gordon Fruin. The man fully corroborated Janet's story, and there were no wounds on his hands. He was quite slim and lanky, so he likely wouldn't have been able to overpower Ronnie King in an attack. At that moment, the police were ready to cross him off the list of potential suspects when one of Gordon's remarks caught their attention. He mentioned that he identified as part of the non-traditional orientation community, just like Janet. When asked to elaborate, he explained that Griffin and Koshia had been in a romantic relationship, but had broken up at least a couple of years earlier. To dig deeper, investigators ran a background check on Janet. It turned out that during her relationship with Gina, the police were frequently called to their home due to various incidents, usually caused by Griffin. On November 5th, a joint funeral for Lynn and Ronnie was held at St. Mark's Episcopal Church, attended by over 220 people. While close friends said their goodbyes to the victims, detectives continued to search for additional evidence in the case. They finally turned their attention to the disconnected phone line and the answering machine full of messages. Investigators decided to listen to the tape for any messages that might provide a clue to solving the crime, but what they heard exceeded their expectations. Throughout the recording, Gina's dog could be heard barking from its crate, so the officers initially struggled to make out the meaning of the words in the background. Amid the dog's barking, crashing, and the sound of breaking glass, two female voices could be clearly distinguished. A heated argument was clearly brewing between them. One voice begged for mercy, while the other hurled accusations at her opponent. Then the second woman addressed someone by the name Butch. The recording lasted for 7 minutes. It seemed the answering machine had captured the crime in real time, meaning someone in the house had pressed the record button, anticipating that the unexpected encounter could turn into a nightmare. Most likely, Lynn had done this deliberately to protect herself in some way. The officers made a copy of the answering machine tape and sent it to the FBI so technical experts could remove the background noise and enhance the audio quality for clearer analysis. It didn't take long for investigators to discover that Butch was actually Gordon Fruin's nickname, a playful reference to his modest physical build. The enhanced version of the recording made it possible to discern the words of others present in the kitchen at the time. A woman could be heard asking her accomplice to bring a knife, while Lynn begged for mercy and pleaded for them to at least let Ronnie go, as he was completely innocent. Additionally, Lynn could be heard addressing the attacker by name, Janet. This evidence was a major breakthrough in the investigation, as it captured the voices of both the perpetrator and her accomplice. However, it was still only circumstantial evidence. Something more substantial was needed. At that moment, detectives decided to speak with Gordon Fruin again, and this time, the man, unable to withstand the interrogation, confessed everything to the police. All it took was a mention of the answering machine recording. His story was as follows. On November 1st, around 10:30 a.m., Janet Griffin and her 25-year-old daughter, Melody, arrived at Gordon's house in a rented car. He explained that he had no idea something terrible was about to happen. At first, he didn't even know they were heading to Lynn and Gina's place. Only after Fruin got into the car did Janet mention they were going to Middletown to visit her former girlfriend. On the way, the group listened to old songs on the radio and sang along cheerfully. Everyone was in a great mood. Upon reaching the right street, Melody parked the rented car a little ways off and stayed there, while Gordon and Janet headed to Gina's house. Griffin, without even knocking, opened the front door and walked inside, while Gordon stayed on the porch waiting to be invited in. He claimed he had no idea what Janet was planning. While outside, Gordon heard 4 or 5 gunshots, followed by a woman's scream. He ran into the house and heard voices coming from the kitchen. Janet was arguing with Lynn, and both women turned to him for help. Griffin asked him to help her restrain Lynn, while Stellar begged him to call 911. The homeowner saw a strange man and, assuming he was a neighbor or a passerby who had come running at the sound of screams, desperately pleaded with him to call the police. She had no idea Gordon was Janet's friend. Then, according to Fruin, he approached the phone, but Griffin, holding a knife, cut the phone cord and then turned and began stabbing Lynn in the neck with the same knife. Later, she smashed a lamp over the homeowner's head and struck Ronnie on the head with a ceramic vase. During the attack, Janet cut her hand on glass shards. When it was over, the woman turned to her friend and declared that he was now an accomplice to the crime. This threat had a real impact on him. That's why he didn't initially tell investigators the whole truth. The perpetrators left the house after ensuring that Ronnie and Lynn were dead. They returned to the parked car where Melody was waiting and fled the crime scene. On the way out of Middletown, they stopped at a nearby pond so Janet could dispose of the gun. Back home, Gordon helped his friend bandage the wound on her hand while Melody returned the rented car. In essence, the man claimed he had no idea about Janet's plans and that he didn't participate in the massacre. Gordon allegedly didn't even know Griffin had brought a gun. The next person the detectives wanted to speak with was Janet's daughter, Melody. At first, the girl claimed she was at work at the ski resort that day. But when the police explained that this could easily be verified and that lying could lead to charges, Melody confirmed Gordon's account. According to her, she only drove her mother and her friend to the neighboring state. They wanted to visit Gina Coccia and then go shopping. Melody dropped Janet and Gordon off near Gina's house and went about her own business. On the way back, she got a little lost. When she approached the car, her mother and her friend were already waiting there. Melody noticed a bleeding cut on her mother's hand. Janet explained that she had accidentally cut herself. The girl told the officers she wasn't part of any conspiracy and had no idea what had happened inside the house where Gina lived. Her mother was in poor health and physically wouldn't have had the strength to kill 2 adults. Janet had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. She often fainted and was very vulnerable. However, the next day, Melody overheard her mother and Gordon discussing the horrific crime at work, which raised strange suspicions in the girl. But wanting to quickly push these disturbing thoughts out of her mind, Melody didn't tell anyone. She just wanted to protect her mother. By now, the police had enough evidence to arrest Janet and charge her with the massacre. On November 9, 1993, Griffin was arrested. She was to be extradited to Connecticut. If found guilty, she faced either the death penalty or life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Despite the charges, Janet insisted on her innocence and remained silent during interrogations. Meanwhile, Gina Coccia couldn't believe that her former lover was responsible for Lynn and Ronnie's deaths. She had never heard Janet say anything bad about Lynn. After their breakup, the women maintained a friendly relationship. Not only Gina, but everyone who knew Janet closely was shocked by the arrest and the charges. No one believed this woman was capable of taking a life. Janet herself wasn't about to give up without a fight. She did everything she could to delay her reckoning. Through her lawyer, Griffin contested her extradition from Vermont to Connecticut, forcing the grieving families of Lynn and Ronnie to wait endlessly for justice to prevail. As a result, another charge was added to her list: obstructing justice. The police needed additional evidence to ensure Janet faced consequences for her crime. With Gordon's help, they found a .32 caliber firearm at the bottom of an artificial pond about a meter deep. It was an antique revolver, impossible to buy in a regular gun store. It was immediately sent to a forensic lab for testing, where it was confirmed that the bullets found in Lynn and Ronnie's bodies were fired from this revolver. In December, Janet was finally extradited to Middletown, where the crime had occurred. She became the first woman in Connecticut to stand trial for a capital offense. The prosecution team found a witness who could confirm that Griffin had long planned to get rid of Lynn Steller. This witness was 36-year-old Natalie Jurgen, a colleague and friend of Janet's, who rented her a place to live. She provided testimony in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Natalie reported that in the months leading up to the massacre, she and Janet made 4 trips from Vermont to Middletown between August 14th and November 1st. During these trips, Griffin familiarized herself with the location of Lynn's house and the neighborhood's layout. Initially, she told Natalie she wanted to write insults on Steller's car with a permanent marker, but she never followed through. A few weeks later, Janet confessed to Natalie that she wanted to win Gina back, and to do so, she needed to eliminate Lynn, who had interfered in their lives and ruined everything. Griffin outlined a specific plan to ambush her rival on her way to work. She planned to wait until Lynn stopped at a stop sign, shoot her, and then set the car on fire. Janet asked Natalie to drive her to Connecticut for this purpose. When Jurgen refused, she threatened to kill Natalie's children. Fortunately, that day, Steller took a different route home, and the assassination attempt failed. It was fear for her family that prevented the witness from reporting the planned crime to law enforcement. Janet May Griffin was born in July 1946 in Springfield, Vermont. Raised in a large family, Janet was no angel. At 16, she was sent to a reform school for 6 months for stealing a car. At 20, Janet married and later gave birth to 5 children. Over her lifetime, she held many jobs: a nurse's aide, a salesperson, a teacher's assistant at a railroad school that supported students with special needs, and a corrections officer at Rutland Prison. However, she was fired from the latter after just 5 months for an inappropriate relationship with an inmate. Janet later divorced her husband, but they always stayed in touch and co-parented their children. Gina Kochia had actually known Griffin her entire life. There was a significant age difference between them, and Janet had once been Gina's babysitter. When Kochia was 22, she ran into her former nanny in the city center. Janet's life wasn't going well. She had broken up with her latest boyfriend and had been sleeping in her car for the past few days. Gina felt sorry for her former nanny and offered her a place to stay temporarily. She then helped Janet get a job as a housekeeper at the ski resort where she worked. Their constant proximity at home and work led to a romantic relationship. Gina was an extrovert, a very energetic and sociable person. She enjoyed spending time with others and playing sports. Janet, on the other hand, was a homebody who loved knitting and watching TV in the evenings. It was Gina who ended the relationship. For a while, they continued living together, but eventually, Kochia asked her friend to move out. Janet was deeply upset by the breakup. She still loved Gina, even though she was fully aware of her former partner's intentions. It was a case of unrequited love. Kochia tried to distance herself for a while, but felt it was only making things worse for both of them. When Griffin moved into an apartment with Natalie Jurgen, another friend, she and Gina continued to see each other. At the time, Janet had no idea that Kochia had started dating another woman, Lynn Steller. When she learned about her former partner's move, Griffin tried to dissuade Gina and confessed to Natalie that she still loved Kochia and wanted her back. Even after Gina moved to Connecticut and began building a happy relationship with Lynn, Janet kept calling her. Gina didn't want to hurt someone she once loved, which is why she continued to answer the calls. Realizing she was losing Gina forever, Griffin made a desperate move. She gave her former partner an ultimatum. If Gina didn't want to be with her, Janet would end their friendship. Naturally, Gina agreed and acknowledged that their friendship was officially over, which was fine with her. However, this wasn't what Janet wanted, so she quickly backtracked and asked Gina to forget the conversation. Gina introduced her to her new partner, Lynn, hoping they could all get along. This was her critical mistake. All of Griffin's pent-up anger focused on Stellar. She considered her a homewrecker, though that wasn't the case. She cursed her and wished her dead. On October 4th, about a month before the massacre, Janet and her daughter Melody made an unplanned trip to Connecticut. They showed up at Gina's house unannounced. Gina had no choice but to pretend she was happy about the unexpected visit from her former friend. Janet and Lynn got along fine despite their differences. Gina tried to smooth things over by sharing a slightly awkward but funny story. Recently, she had forgotten her house keys. Not wanting to wait outside for Lynn and Ronnie to return, she climbed through the doggy door. Gina laughed as she recounted squeezing through the opening meant for the dog. She didn't know that a sinister idea was already forming in Janet's mind. Having gathered the necessary evidence for an arrest on May 20th, 1994, the police detained Gordon Fruin. Realizing he couldn't escape accountability for his actions, the man revealed additional information to investigators. He said Janet had forced him to climb through the doggy door and unlock the house from the inside. She threatened to shoot him if he refused. From the statements provided by Gordon, Natalie, and Melody, detectives pieced together a likely sequence of events. Driven by jealousy, Janet was determined to win Gina back at any cost, even resorting to crime. Gordon squeezed through the door's dog flap. Then he and Janet hid inside, waiting for Lynn's return. They didn't know Ronnie would come with her. The young man's arrival wasn't part of Griffin's plan. He was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. He became a victim of someone else's love triangle. Stellar and her nephew returned from work. After parking the car in the garage, they entered the house through the side door leading to the kitchen. Janet didn't hesitate. As soon as she heard footsteps, she started shooting. The first bullet hit Ronnie King, bringing him down instantly, and a struggle broke out between the two rivals. Despite her gunshot wounds, Lynn wasn't about to give up easily and fought back until the end. She had a 10-year-old son she lived for. She was also responsible for her nephew, though he was already an adult. Stellar pleaded for their lives, begging not to harm them, but Janet was unrelenting. After firing all her bullets, she grabbed a knife. Then she smashed a lamp and a ceramic vase over the victims' heads. The woman left Lynn and Ronnie no chance. In 1996, after lengthy deliberations, the jury found Janet guilty of the double murder. Although her crimes carried the death penalty, the court showed leniency and sentenced Griffin to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Janet had no prior convictions. Her family and friends knew her as a loving, devoted mother and grandmother. She coached a softball team, was active, participated in Girl Scout activities, and volunteered at the fire department. Due to multiple sclerosis, Griffin's health deteriorated after her arrest, to the point that she had to attend court hearings in a wheelchair. Gordon Fruin tearfully told the court how he was paralyzed with fear at the crime scene. He was genuinely afraid of his ruthless friend, so he followed all her instructions. Since it wasn't confirmed that he actively participated in the massacre, Gordon was convicted of aiding and abetting and sentenced to 30 years in prison. But he was not destined to be released. Gordon Fruin died in December 2020 at the age of 59. Janet Griffin also ended her days in a correctional facility. She passed away in August 2022 at the age of 76. An adult woman, driven solely by selfish desires and determined to win back her former lover at all costs, not only took the lives of others, but also condemned herself to spend the rest of her days behind bars. If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video. This unusual child's name is Derek, and even his own mother was afraid of him. At some point, things went so far that the woman felt like a prisoner in her own home. How could a young boy scare his mother? Why did Derek behave this way? Who is to blame for him turning into an uncontrollable monster? Today's story describes a truly horrific case that, in principle, could happen in any family where children are raised incorrectly and obvious problems are ignored. If you are a parent or plan to become one, try to avoid the mistakes discussed in this story. And before we get started, be kind enough to support my channel. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and stay active. It will help a lot. I will be very grateful to you for that. Let's get started. Derek Campus was born on November 13, 1991, in the city of Marshfield, Wisconsin, where the rest of this case takes place. Shelley became pregnant with her son when she was only 19 years old and was studying to become a nurse in her first year of college. At the time, the young woman felt too young to have children and was completely unprepared for motherhood. It seemed to her that everything happened too quickly. She hadn't yet had the chance to enjoy her status as an adult or earn her degree when her belly started to grow. Nevertheless, Shelley decided to keep the baby and completely change her lifestyle. Moreover, the young woman was going to be a single mother because the father of her unborn child vanished as soon as he heard about the pregnancy. When Derek was born, Shelley's world turned upside down. She adored her little boy. The child grew up very cute. His chubby cheeks alone were enough to melt hearts. Now, looking at her son, Shelley couldn't stop rejoicing that she had made the right decision and wasn't afraid of any challenges. When Derek was just 7 weeks old, tragedy struck. The boy became seriously ill. He developed a severe respiratory virus and pneumonia. He was in such bad condition that doctors worried whether the baby would survive. The child was urgently airlifted to a hospital in Minnesota because every minute counted. Shelley was in complete horror at the thought that she might lose her boy. The entire way to the hospital, she prayed that he would have the strength to hold on. Fortunately, a miracle happened, and Derek pulled through. Shelley was over the moon with happiness. She couldn't believe that her little boy would recover and continue to delight her with his smile. However, the severe illness and the fact that Derek had nearly lost his life completely changed his future. From that moment on, Shelley decided that her son would get everything he wanted, whenever he wanted it. She was terrified by the thought of losing her child. That fear stayed with her for life, so Shelley wanted to give Derek everything in her power. Of course, at first glance, this seems wonderful. Any normal parent wants to make their child happy and provide them with everything they need. However, in Shelley's case, things developed a bit differently. At first, everything went fairly well. Derek recovered and became a typical toddler, playing with a ball, learning to ride a bike, and loving to walk with his mom in the park. He was just like other kids. But Shelley continued to spoil Derek more and more. When the boy got older and realized that the whole world revolved around him, he started to take advantage of it. That's when the real problems began, because even in early childhood, Derek showed some behavioral issues. By the age of 7, the boy had a bad temper. He was very defiant and never did what his mom asked. The kid constantly argued with her and always stood his ground, going far beyond typical childish tantrums. One day, Shelley and her son went to a mall to buy groceries. As they passed the toy department, Derek saw toy trucks in the display. The trucks were so bright that they naturally caught attention. Of course, the little boy wanted a truck. He ran to the toy shelf, grabbed one truck, and handed it to his mom to buy. Shelley put the truck back and calmly said that Derek had enough toy trucks at home. They were there for groceries, so she wouldn't buy the truck. Instead of following his mom, Derek threw the biggest tantrum of his life. He grabbed the toy truck and started smashing it on the floor until it broke. Even when the truck shattered into hundreds of pieces, Derek didn't stop his tantrum. But that's not all. The boy told his mom that if she didn't buy him a truck, he'd break another toy in the store. Shelley was completely shocked. Her son caused a wild scene in the store. He screamed so loudly that other shoppers stared at the child and shook their heads disapprovingly. At that moment, Shelley realized she should have set some rules for Derek and explained that such behavior was unacceptable. However, she didn't do that because, when Derek was just 7 weeks old and nearly died, she had promised herself to give her son everything he wanted. So Shelley bought him the toy truck and separately paid for the one he broke. After that incident in the store, Derek learned he could demand anything from his mother. Over time, this behavior repeated multiple times. The boy didn't just throw tantrums, he became aggressive. And when his mother tried to explain something to him, Derek would lash out at her with fists and screams. In the end, all his wishes were fulfilled. Since Shelley always gave in to her son, she reinforced his bad behavior. The concept of discipline was absent in Derek's life. He was the epitome of a spoiled child. Over the years, Shelley began to notice some oddities in her son. One day, she observed that Derek didn't play with his toys like other kids did. He would simply take them out of the box, neatly line them up in front of himself, and then just sit and stare at them. When he got bored, he would put the toys back in the box. Derek also had a peculiar approach to food. He never ate anything with his hands. Burgers, potato chips, donuts, sandwiches, he ate them all with a fork. Perhaps he found it unpleasant to touch food with his hands, or there was some other issue. Shelley described it as something strange. She never thought her son might have special needs that required attention, or that he might have a condition needing medical expertise. No, she just called her son quirky. And all these things, which might seem minor at first glance, but perhaps needed investigation, were simply ignored. Moreover, Derek struggled at school. He found it hard to communicate with other kids and make friends, so he grew up incredibly lonely and isolated from his peers. Sometimes he showed aggression toward others, whether it was another child or an adult. If someone did something Derek didn't like, he would clench his fists and start shaking violently, which looked abnormal. Once, a classmate came to his house, and Derek took out all his toys, lined them up as usual, and started staring at them. Meanwhile, the other child reached for a toy car, and Derek didn't like it at all. He absolutely didn't want anyone else touching his things because he simply didn't know how to share. The guest's innocent attempt to take his toy sparked real rage in Derek. He lunged at the boy, knocked him to the floor, and started beating him, repeating over and over that those were his things, and he hadn't allowed anyone to touch them. Finally, Shelley heard the noise in the kid's room. She ran in, pulled her son off, and then took the other child to the living room, leaving Derek alone in the room to play with his toys. When the classmate's mom came to pick him up, Shelley said, essentially covering up her son's behavior, that there had been a minor incident between the boys. As a result, her son's behavior went unpunished again. When Derek turned 9, Shelley got a boyfriend. The couple had been dating for several months, but Robert hadn't yet met Shelley's son, though he had heard from her about his character quirks. The thing is, the mother was simply afraid of Derek's reaction to a new man in the house. When Robert finally met the child, he acted strangely, approaching the boy, and the first thing he did, parting his hair to inspect his scalp. Shelley asked what was going on, and Robert, with a smirk, explained that he was looking for the mark of 666 on Derek's head. It was an odd introduction between an adult and a spoiled child, but Shelley's reaction was even worse. She knew about her son's behavioral issues, but still supported Robert's joke, saying that there was definitely a devil in Derek. It's quite obvious that the man chose a completely wrong tone for his first meeting with his lover's son, and from that moment, their relationship only got worse. Robert and Shelley got married, and eventually the husband moved into his wife's house and decided that it was now his job to establish rules there. Of course, in some ways, the man was undoubtedly right. It's normal for there to be some discipline in a household, for a child to understand what's bad and what's good. However, Robert took the wrong approach. From the start, he was incredibly strict with Derek, telling him what to do and enforcing rules with an iron fist. Derek was about 10 years old, and throughout his entire life, not only had he not followed any discipline, he didn't even know such a concept existed. His mother never punished him and always fulfilled his every wish. The boy couldn't understand where this man came from, moving into their house and trying to dictate his rules. So it's no surprise that Derek began to rebel even more and express his dissatisfaction to his mother. Instead of explaining basic things to her son, Shelley tried to please him in every way. Whenever Robert and his rules weren't around, the mother did everything possible to make Derek happy. She showered him with praise, attention, gifts, everything he wanted. She apologized for her husband's behavior and tried to compensate for the imposition of discipline and new rules. The mother's stance sent Derek completely mixed signals. Robert was too strict, while Shelley was too soft. So now Derek simply waited for Robert to go to work and started manipulating his mother. Christmas came, and Shelley bought her son a new PlayStation console. The boy had been insisting on this gift for a long time, so he eagerly awaited Christmas morning. As soon as he opened his eyes, Derek rushed downstairs straight to the Christmas tree. He wanted to open all his presents immediately, but Robert stopped him. The man declared that they would all sit down to breakfast together first, as is proper in a normal family. Only then would Derek be allowed to open his presents. He sat the boy at the table and placed a plate of scrambled eggs in front of him, which Derek hated. He said that until the plate was empty, the boy wouldn't leave the table. Naturally, Derek wasn't going to eat something he didn't like. He silently stared at the plate and did nothing. Derek sat at the table all day. He didn't eat a single bite of the eggs and didn't say a word. It was a silent, tense protest against Robert. Christmas is a magical day for many children. Derek's holiday was completely ruined. The boy went to bed on Christmas without presents, without fun, and without food. He didn't eat a single crumb all day. The next day, Robert went to work. Only Derek and his mom were left in the house. Shelley did what she always did. She apologized to her son for Robert's actions, tried to hug and comfort him, saying that now he could calmly open his presents. Derek slowly walked to the Christmas tree. He opened his new PlayStation and began to destroy it. The boy broke everything he could. He was very angry and wanted to punish his mother for what her husband had done. And what did Shelley do? What she always did. She went to the store and bought another gaming console to give to her son. In this Christmas situation, of course, you can only sympathize with the boy, who was deprived of his long-awaited holiday, punished for no reason. The adult's behavior cannot be called normal because Robert's treatment of Derek bordered on abuse. And Shelley, instead of protecting her child, silently watched it happen. She absolutely shouldn't have allowed Robert to treat her son that way, especially on Christmas. The adults did such contradictory things that it's no surprise Derek's fragile psyche started to malfunction. Shelley really needed to set some boundaries and discipline in her son's life. Then Robert would have had fewer reasons to pick on him. Christmas passed, and family relationships only got worse. Derek grew older and turned into a teenager. If before he simply tolerated Robert and then took out all his grievances on his mother, now he began to confront the man physically. Shelley was constantly torn between her son and her husband. The woman was too scared to take a firm stance with Derek. She knew that as soon as Robert went to work, she would be left alone with an enraged teenager. Shelley felt like a prisoner in her own home. She constantly walked on eggshells just to avoid triggering Derek's anger and aggression toward her, because in essence, he was the master of the house. At the same time, Shelley continued to ignore the situation, burying her head in the sand. Apparently, the mother hoped everything would resolve itself. But it didn't. Derek grew older, and his conflicts with Robert took on a different tone. After each clash, Shelley secretly praised her son and apologized for what Robert said and did. She still tried to cover up the hurts caused by her husband with her love and attention, regardless of how Derek behaved. However, at some point, Shelley decided she'd had enough and that she needed to finally try to do something. She took her son to a psychotherapist. Unfortunately, here too, the woman was unlucky. Shelley encountered an unprofessional therapist. Without conducting a proper evaluation of Derek's behavior, the doctor quickly diagnosed him with depression, and that was the end of it. Maybe the boy did have depression, but it was unlikely his main problem. Nevertheless, the doctor prescribed antidepressants for the teenager and ended the session. Naturally, things only got worse. Instead of any positive changes in behavior, Derek completely withdrew into himself and practically stopped talking. He simply disconnected from reality and isolated himself even more from his peers. At the same time, his anger and aggression didn't go away, they only intensified. So, it seems the medication wasn't suitable for him. A few more years passed. The confrontation between Robert and Derek ended in the boy's favor. Shelley's husband couldn't take it, and they separated. Of course, there could have been other issues between the spouses, but the fact remains. Derek had just turned 18. He was in his final year of high school. At this time, a very important event happened in his life. He got a girlfriend. Derek had absolutely no romantic experience. He simply didn't allow himself to get close to anyone, let alone form friendships. However, this girl was radically different from most of Derek's peers. Her name was Macy McCullough. She attended the same school but was 2 years younger. Macy was only 16, and she was the complete opposite of Derek. She was described as incredibly sweet, friendly, and extremely sociable. Macy planned to graduate high school and pursue a career in medicine. They say opposites attract, and so the young people instantly found common ground. It was amazing because Derek finally met someone with whom he could feel at ease and open up. Shelley had never seen her son so happy. He became very caring and attentive. A smile never left his face, and his anger and aggression seemed to fade away. The mother was overjoyed because, deep down, she feared her son was incapable of loving someone close to him and would never be truly happy. At first, everything went wonderfully, but soon after the relationship began, 16-year-old Macy told Derek she was pregnant. The boy was in complete shock and couldn't believe it. In reality, the young man was thrilled by the unexpected news. He told Macy he was ready to become a father and would do everything to ensure his child grew up healthy. It seemed Derek had finally found someone he could be himself with. As soon as the woman learned she would soon become a grandmother, she invited Macy to live with them. At a young age, the girl had lost her mother. She was raised by her father, who worked a lot and was often absent from home. Knowing she would soon need help with the baby, Macy agreed and moved in with Derek. At that moment, they got engaged. 9 months later, Macy gave birth to a boy named Gabriel, and Derek and Shelley were over the moon with happiness. From the first days, the young man genuinely cared for his son, striving to be a good father. He adored Gabriel. After finishing high school, Derek immediately turned into a stay-at-home dad and spent all his time with his little son. He changed diapers himself, fed him with Macy, bathed him, played with him, and put him to bed. Obviously, after the baby was born, Macy returned to school. She spent a lot of time at classes, but Derek was even happy that all the responsibilities for their son were on him. For a while, everything went smoothly, everyone was content, and got along well. But then Derek's unusual behavior started to resurface. Now, the young man, like his mother's new husband Robert once did, decided to establish a certain routine in the house. As his son grew older and had a daily schedule, Derek forced everyone in the household to follow specific rules. Everything had to be done at a strictly designated time in the same order. Now everyone had the same morning, day, and evening. For example, one of the contentious issues was the curtains. For some reason, Derek didn't want natural light to enter the house, so he insisted on keeping the curtains closed all day in every room. But Shelley wasn't used to living in darkness. She would go downstairs and open the curtains. Then Derek would rush into the living room, pull the curtains back, and start a fight. In the end, Shelley always agreed and gave in to her son, as she had done all her life. Derek insisted on strictly following his routine. He imposed these rules most heavily on his fiancée, Macy, constantly criticizing her, yelling, or scolding her for doing something wrong. After their son was born, Derek became incredibly controlling and began treating Macy demeaningly. He started dictating who she could see and where she could go. Now Macy wasn't allowed to take a step without Derek's permission. The only place she was allowed to go was school, then a part-time job, after which Macy had to come straight home. To any normal person, it was clear that Derek was going too far in his desire to control everything. But Shelley just watched and never interfered in her son and his fiancée's relationship. She never tried to protect Macy or tell Derek that he was acting wrongly and that his behavior was offensive. Shelley was simply afraid of her son. However, this behavior didn't protect her from her heir's wrath. On the contrary, Derek began to get angry at his mother, calling her a pathetic failure and mocking her alcoholism. After parting with Robert and mourning her worthless life, the woman began drinking little by little, and soon she couldn't imagine a day without alcohol. Shelley never expected her son to turn against her. It was incredibly painful for the mother to hear all these hurtful insults. But she had neither the strength nor the desire to stand up to her son. She simply let Derek treat her and Macy however he wanted once again. One day, returning home, Shelley walked into the kitchen and found her son sitting at the kitchen table with a firearm in his hands. He had bought an AK-47, though he had never shown any interest in weapons before. This was a real shock for Shelley. Naturally, she asked what was going on, to which she heard a response that made her blood run cold. Derek pointed the gun at his mother and said she'd better sleep with one eye open because one night he would shoot her or slit her throat. At that moment, Shelley realized that her son, whom she loved and spoiled so much, was capable of easily taking her life. Shelley was in complete horror. When Derek wasn't home, she had a deadbolt installed on her bedroom door, so her son couldn't get in at night. Most of the time, the woman didn't leave her room unless absolutely necessary. Shelley's fears grew even stronger when Derek started asking about her life insurance policy. The boy didn't want to be left without money if something happened to his mother, so now she felt like a true prisoner in her own home. And that's when her alcoholism worsened even more. Shelley locked herself in her room and drank, trying to heal her emotional wounds this way. But besides Shelley, Macy and little Gabriel lived in the house, and Derek's fiancée bore the brunt of it all. The boy turned into a real domestic tyrant. One day, when he wasn't home, the women talked. They both complained about Derek's behavior and decided they needed to get rid of him. They could manage with the child without him. Besides, Gabriel would be safer if his father was far away, because Derek's behavior was getting worse and worse every day. Shelley and Macy decided to kick the only man out of the house, but they soon abandoned their idea because they were too afraid of him. Shelley had a Labrador dog named Lucy. Derek never truly loved Lucy. He was annoyed by the dog's fur and the mess it caused. One day, Shelley had to go to the hospital for a scheduled gallbladder removal surgery. After a short stay in the hospital, she returned home and discovered that her dog was missing. When the mother asked where Lucy was, Derek responded with a cold, chilling look. Then he casually said that the dog ran out onto the road and got hit by a car. He supposedly took Lucy to the vet where she died. The vets cremated the dog, and then Derek disposed of the ashes, so he saw no reason for concern and didn't understand why it bothered his mother. Deep down, Shelley knew her son was lying. Lucy was an adult, well-behaved dog. She would never have run out onto the road for no reason. Shelley believed her son had simply gotten rid of the animal because he wanted to hurt her. Perhaps he just took her far from home and abandoned her, or maybe shot her in the woods somewhere. However, the mother didn't confront Derek about his lie and once again stayed silent. This went on for 2 years. Derek controlled everything around him, set his own rules, insulted, and intimidated the household. Macy and Shelley were trapped with him in the same house, living in this nightmare day after day. Macy had just turned 18, and she graduated high school. And then, the girl decided she'd had enough. She had to get out of that house, no matter what. Little Gabriel was already 2 years old. Macy kept telling Shelley that she wanted to leave Derek. She could no longer endure the humiliations and abuse, but she didn't know how to pull it off. The girl was afraid that Derek might hurt her. She also understood that if she took Gabriel with her, his father would lose it, and that would only make things worse. but she couldn't leave the child with this monster either. In the end, after long planning, Macy simply walked out of the house and didn't return. She left her son with Shelley and, deep down, sincerely believed it would be better and safer for Gabriel. Once outside the house, Macy thought she was finally free. Unfortunately, her freedom didn't last long, as the story took a much darker turn. As soon as Derek returned home and realized Macy had left, he displayed very unusual behavior. The first thing he did was open all the curtains and let in sunlight, something he had never done before. Then he started pacing the living room, repeating the same phrase over and over. "I won't let another man be the father of my son." Derek kept saying he wouldn't give up the child. Although Gabriel was at home, for some reason, Derek was fixated on the idea that Macy was having an affair, that she was seeing another man behind his back, and that this man would raise his son. Shelley, as usual, watched Derek from the sidelines and didn't intervene. She just worried that her son might do something foolish. The woman even called her ex-husband Robert and asked for advice. The man, apparently not wanting to deal with others' problems, said that Derek was probably depressed again and that it was better to leave him alone for now. On September 7th, 2012, Shelley was out all day. She was attending an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. When she returned, Macy's car was parked in the driveway near their house. Her first thought was doubt. It was unlikely the girl had returned of her own accord. Then Shelley noticed that the front door was open, which made her panic. And when she walked inside and saw a trail of blood running through the house, Shelley calmed down for a moment. She thought Derek had lost his temper again, broken a mirror or something, and cut Renji. System. Cut himself. She followed the trail of blood down the hallway, which led to the bathroom. The door was closed, but a large pool of blood had seeped out from under it. Shelley flung the door open and froze in place. In the bathtub, covered in blood, lay Macy with her throat slit. Unfortunately, it was too late. Shelley could do nothing to help the girl, as 18-year-old Macy McCullough was dead. Shelley's body went rigid with fear. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. It felt like she was in a horror movie. The scene in the bathroom seemed unreal, but it was happening. Macy was dead. The mother had no doubt that her son had done it. Then Shelley remembered her grandson Gabriel. Could Derek have harmed his own child? The boy was nowhere in the house, nor was Derek. Shelley immediately called emergency services and reported the incident. The arriving police searched the house again and then took Shelley to the station to take her statement. While the officers asked standard questions, the woman, as if in a frenzy, kept repeating that Derek had taken Gabriel. And then it hit her. She suddenly had a vivid image of her enraged son taking his own life after killing her grandson. The vision was so clear that Shelley began trembling with fear. She immediately shared her suspicions with the detectives. In truth, the police had no idea where Derek might be or what he was capable of. They only knew that he had likely fled with the boy. A massive search operation for the father and son began. They didn't want to find them too late, after a tragedy had occurred. Derek's face was everywhere, in all the news. The search continued through the night into the early morning of the next day. At 5 a.m, a motel employee called the police, reporting that the man they were looking for had just checked into a room with a small child. Law enforcement officers rushed to the motel immediately. They were armed and ready to apprehend the suspect, as Derek was suspected of murdering Macy McCullough and kidnapping the child. The police also knew he was armed. The only thing they didn't know was whether Gabriel was alive or if the man had harmed his own son. However, things turned out to be much simpler. As the team prepared to storm the motel room, Derek walked out with his hands raised. He had heard the noise in the hallway and realized he couldn't escape, so he surrendered to the police without a word. When they handcuffed him, they found 2-year-old Gabriel alive and unharmed inside the room. Thankfully, nothing had happened to him. Derek was immediately taken in for questioning, but first, he was given the right to make a phone call. The young man called his mother, Shelley, and told her he was sorry things turned out this way. He hadn't meant to do anything like that, but now nothing could be undone. At the end of the call, Derek, for the first time in his life, told his mother he loved her and asked her to take care of Gabriel. The police began their investigation and almost immediately found Macy's blood on Derek's clothes and in his car. The young man hadn't even bothered to dispose of the murder weapon, the knife, probably realizing they'd find him anyway. An autopsy of Macy's body revealed the brutality of the attack. Her carotid artery and jugular vein were severed. She had also been stabbed in the back. Macy had numerous defensive wounds on her hands, indicating she had fought back against her attacker. The case was essentially closed. All evidence pointed to Derek, and he was charged with intentional homicide. While the young man was in jail awaiting trial, his mother, Shelley, did everything she could to get her son out. She tried to fix the situation, as she had always done, and even planned to testify in Derek's defense. They say, a mother's love knows no bounds. Derek had just taken the life of an 18-year-old girl, the mother of his child, and Shelley was desperate to get him out of jail, not thinking that she could be next in Macy's place. However, no matter how hard Shelley tried, she could do nothing. There was too much evidence against Derek, and she even met with his public defender to devise a plan. Although Derek initially pleaded not guilty, he eventually took a plea deal in exchange for a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 40 years. But the story didn't end there. After the guilty verdict, when Derek learned he would spend most of his life behind bars, he paid another inmate over $4,000 to act as a hitman. Derek wanted the man to kill the person he believed Macy was having an affair with. Fortunately, the assassination attempt failed, but Derek was still charged with attempted solicitation. After the trial concluded, Shelley gained full custody of her grandson, Gabriel. Now, the most important thing is that the woman doesn't repeat her past parenting mistakes. Haunted by the scars of the past, Shelley couldn't return to her home. She stayed with a friend for a few days and then moved out of town, keeping away from the media and the internet. Since then, she has led a secluded life and has given only one interview. Shelley mentioned that she hasn't been able to find the strength to visit Macy's grave. A documentary film about this story titled Evil Lives Here. In the Grip of My Son was made. In it, Shelley talks about Derek's childhood and the crime he committed. She herself believes that her son didn't intend to take Macy's life. He simply lost control at some point and grabbed the knife. Currently, Derek Campus has changed his name to Gabriel. He is still serving a life sentence in a Wisconsin correctional facility. Online discussions continue about who is to blame for Derek becoming a criminal. Some condemn the mother's behavior, saying she indulged her son's whims and didn't hold him accountable. Others defend the woman, citing statistics. There are many parents in the world who make serious mistakes in raising their children, but their kids don't become criminals. So, what was the decisive factor in this case? Was it poor parenting, or did nature play a cruel trick on Derek, making him aggressive and unable to control his emotions? If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video. Triplets Lucy, Caitlin, and Jane had everything for a happy life. But at some point, one of the girls got bored, which led to her inevitable downfall. Lucy, Caitlin, and Jane Lee were born in 1995 in Shenzhen, China. They were triplet sisters. Lucy, whose real name was Yun Lu, was the eldest because she was born 5 minutes before Caitlin and Jane. When the sisters were very young, their parents decided to emigrate to Toronto, Canada, leaving the children in China for the time being. So, in fact, close relatives took care of raising the triplets until they were 7 years old. Only when the parents had fully settled in Toronto did they bring the girls to join them. When the whole family was reunited in Canada, the triplets gained a younger brother and a younger sister. Their father ran a driving school for Chinese immigrants and was successful in his business. But the most driven and successful was Lucy's mother, Hong Wei, or Winnie, as her loved ones called her. The mother's firm thrived. Winnie ran an asset management business called Respond International, working primarily with Canadians of Chinese descent. The business involved selling life insurance policies that allowed clients to transfer money from abroad without paying taxes. Soon, Winnie became a very well-known businesswoman in Canada. She spoke at various conferences, interacting with the country's most influential people. There are even photos of Winnie with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Ontario Premier Doug Ford. Winnie managed to build strong connections with various members of the elite, eventually becoming a highly influential and powerful figure herself. She was not just wealthy, she was considered a multimillionaire. As for the children, they grew up gradually but rarely saw their mother because she was very busy. In the rare moments when the businesswoman carved out time for household matters in her tight schedule, she was very demanding of her daughters and son. The mother insisted on strict discipline and good grades in school. Winnie wasn't cruel. She simply wanted all her children to achieve success in the future and follow in her footsteps. She trained the girls to strive to be the best of the best. Instead of playing or hanging out with friends, they had to stay home and do all the household chores. Thus, Lucy, Caitlin, Jane, and the two younger children learned to take on significant responsibilities at a very young age. At 13, the triplets founded their own non-profit organization called the Canadian Youth Funding Association, which helped young women and children. Winnie did everything she could to push her daughters toward success in life. She took them with her to many of the business events she attended. She was preparing them to one day take her place in the company. However, not all the children felt the same way about such plans for their lives. It was very hard for Lucy to accept that her parents expected extraordinary achievements from her. She wasn't the most diligent student, which greatly disappointed Winnie. So the eldest daughter and her mother often clashed and argued over this. At school, Lucy considered herself a nerd. At the time, she wore bangs and braces and felt she could never fit in with her classmates. Even in her own family, where academic knowledge and success were valued above all, the girl felt somewhat out of place. At the age of 14, Lucy met a boy named Oliver Carafa, who was 16 at the time. He was 2 grades ahead of her. Oliver Carafa was born in Slovakia in 1993. His parents immigrated to Canada when he was 8 years old. The family first lived in Windsor and then moved to Toronto. The boy had a completely ordinary childhood. Oliver wasn't a goody two-shoes, but he wasn't considered a troublemaker either. He sometimes got into minor trouble, but that's not uncommon for most boys. In high school, Lucy and Oliver started talking, and they quickly developed a romantic relationship, which didn't last long. The boy wanted to get the girl into bed, but Lucy wasn't ready for that aspect of life yet. Oliver wasn't willing to wait for her to grow up and slept with one of her friends. Naturally, after such a turn of events, Lucy's high school romance ended abruptly. The triplets graduated from high school, and their mother insisted that all 3 daughters enroll in the business faculty at the University of Toronto. Winnie had already planned out their entire future, as it seemed she didn't really consider the girls' own wishes. It appeared that what her children wanted didn't matter to the mother. She was simply grooming her replacements. But the worst part was that the woman turned the triplets' lives into a competition among themselves. For example, she promised to buy a new car for whoever got the highest grades. Because of this, the sisters' relationships were sometimes strained. Lucy did fairly well at the university, and after finishing her studies, she began working with her mother in the life insurance business. That's when problems started resurfacing for her. Lucy tried to attract major clients, doing her best to meet her mother's expectations. But apparently, she didn't handle the task as well as Winnie had hoped. The stress of trying to do things she wasn't yet skilled at pushed the girl to her limit. Lucy decided to take a break from her career and live a little for herself. She requested a 2-year leave from work to travel the world, try something new, and figure out what she really wanted to do. The family's financial situation allowed for this, so Winnie gave in and permitted all three daughters to explore other areas of life. The woman promised to cover their expenses for 2 years and provided each of the triplets with a monthly allowance of several $1,000s. Although Lucy seemed to have been under intense pressure her whole life and strived to be like her mother, at the same time, she was incredibly spoiled by her parents. So, what did the Lee triplets do with their newfound free time? All three decided to become influencers, people who shape public opinion and influence the behavior of their target audience through social media. They created accounts on several platforms under the username Mia Triplets and began posting various content. The girls mainly positioned themselves as models. In many photos, they appeared in lingerie and swimsuits. They often posted pictures with the hashtag #SexyTriplets. This became their distinctive feature. The triplets' social media accounts grew and gained popularity. On TikTok, they had 60,000 followers, and on another social network, 40,000. They couldn't be called super popular, but they still had a sizable interested audience. A considerable number of people followed them. As the triplets gained some fame, companies started reaching out to them with collaboration offers. The sisters were sent free products with requests to promote them. They were paid between $500 and $1,000 per post. Thanks to their new lifestyle, Caitlin, one of the sisters, began participating in various beauty pageants, Miss Toronto, Miss Canada, Miss Intercontinental Canada, and others. She repeatedly won prizes and became a runner-up. Caitlin Lee became somewhat of a celebrity, which also boosted the triplets' popularity on social media. In 2019, Lucy Lee turned 24, and at the same time, something significant happened in her life. The same boy, Oliver Carafa, with whom she had a brief high school romance, reappeared on the horizon. Oliver was now 26. What had he been up to for the past 10 years? After graduating high school, Carafa tried to become a model. His photos could be seen on modeling agency websites at the time, but most of the time since he last saw Lucy, Oliver spent in a prison cell. One evening in 2012, 19-year-old Oliver went out drinking with his friend David and David's girlfriend. They got very drunk, mixing several types of alcoholic drinks, and were not entirely coherent. The girlfriend left the friends around 2 a.m., but the guys continued to drink heavily. Finally stepping out into the fresh air, Oliver decided he was capable of driving. However, as it later turned out, his alcohol level was several times above the legal limit. Oliver got behind the wheel, and his friend David sat in the passenger seat. Both were very drunk. Without fully realizing his actions, Carafa hit the road and sped down the highway. His speed was excessive until an obstacle appeared in his path. Due to his intoxication, the young man lost control. He veered off the road at full speed and crashed into a pole. It was a serious accident. Witnesses said the sound was like a plane crash. The car was practically split in half. Unfortunately for David, his seatbelt was torn from its mounting mechanism. The impact threw the passenger out of the car, and he hit a lamppost. His skull was literally crushed, and the boy died on the spot. David lost his life due to his friend's recklessness and irresponsibility. Meanwhile, Oliver somehow miraculously survived the horrific crash alive and almost unscathed. He had only minor injuries. Although authorities later stated that no one should have survived that accident. When Oliver finally realized what had happened, he said he was in deep trouble, that he'd go to jail because a person died because of him. And that's exactly what happened. Carafa was arrested and charged with driving under the influence causing death. By that time, his parents had already returned to Slovakia, and they had to post bail for him. In 2014, Oliver was sentenced to 5 years in prison and banned from driving for 15 years. However, prison didn't reform the wayward teenager. He constantly got into trouble, was involved in smuggling, and kept company with shady individuals. Due to his behavior, Oliver was repeatedly denied parole, so he served the full 5 years. The parole board stated that Carafa was a young man with an abnormal sense of entitlement who believed that society's rules didn't apply to him. And so, in 2019, after serving his full sentence, Oliver tried to get his life back on track. He went on social media, hoping to reconnect with people from his past, and stumbled upon the triplets' profile. He immediately recognized Lucy, his high school girlfriend. Now she was a model and looked very modern and attractive. Of course, Carafa wanted to reach out to her. Lucy was over the moon when Oliver messaged her. She learned that he still dreamed of becoming a model, and in that, they were very similar. Her former boyfriend seemed even more charming and handsome than he was in school. Without hesitation, she agreed to go on a date. The young couple's relationship developed rapidly, as by the second date, Lucy moved in with Oliver. Lucy's mother, Winnie, was not thrilled with this decision because she categorically disliked the young man. She believed he was a bad influence on her daughter and was certain that Oliver would lead Lucy down the wrong path. Considering what would happen next, the mother was right. As a means of leverage, Winnie cut off Lucy's financial support. She had been giving the triplets several $1,000s a month for expenses. Now she declared that since her daughter was living with her boyfriend, she could support herself. At first, this was quite difficult for Lucy, even though she and her sisters earned money from social media advertising, which had to be split 3 ways. Besides, the girl was used to living in luxury, never denying herself anything. However, the problem was soon resolved because Oliver started earning substantial sums and was able to meet his girlfriend's demands. The only thing was, he earned them through less than legal means. After getting out of prison, Carafa started one shady business after another. He wanted to become a real entrepreneur, an influential businessman, a multimillionaire, so he dabbled in all sorts of things, from exporting cars for social media ad shoots to selling weighted blankets. Oliver was ready to do anything to make a ton of money. And he succeeded. Soon, the couple moved into a 2-bedroom townhouse in Toronto. Lucy was Oliver's personal driver because he had lost his driver's license and was banned from driving for 15 years. The girl drove him to all his business meetings and helped transport the cars he sold. Lucy was involved in all of her boyfriend's business ventures. There were suspicions that all these enterprises were illegal. The imported cars that Carafa brought into and out of the country were most likely stolen. He sold them for parts, smuggled them, and made a decent profit from it. But as the saying goes, if you're not caught, you're not a thief. Lucy and Oliver's relationship had been going on for a whole year when the pandemic began in the spring of 2020. The whole world was in lockdown. The couple also stayed home in isolation for a while. But then Oliver got the idea to visit Slovakia to see his parents and then travel around Europe despite the pandemic. And, of course, he wanted to take Lucy with him to introduce her to his family. They bought plane tickets, arrived at the airport, and tried to board their flight. But due to pandemic restrictions, Carafa could return to Slovakia because he had dual citizenship, while Lucy could not because she wasn't a Slovak citizen. At the airport, the couple was told that the only way Lucy could board the flight was if she were Oliver's wife. Any reasonable person would have accepted the rules and canceled the trip. But Lucy and Oliver were not rational people. They decided to get married right there in the airport, online. During the lockdown, many things were indeed done via Zoom, including marriage registrations. But getting married at the airport just to board a plane, without any prior talk of marriage, was foolish and reckless. Nevertheless, Lucy and Oliver did it. They traveled around Europe for several months and then returned home to Canada at the end of the summer. Meanwhile, Carafa planned to expand his business. Somehow, he met a man named Tyler Pratt and desperately wanted to work with him. Oliver saw great opportunities in Tyler that he wanted to exploit. But their relationship with the new acquaintance was far from smooth. Tyler Pratt was born in British Columbia and grew up in a large family. He had previously been married and had 2 children. Officially, Tyler played hockey and, like Oliver, was an entrepreneur, running a diamond production company and a dietary supplement company. But on an unofficial level, this man was involved in selling illegal substances. He wasn't just a street dealer, he was a major player. Pratt dealt with importing large quantities of white powder from another country and then selling it to lower-level distributors. Accordingly, he made a lot of money from it. Rumors were that he could sell drugs worth $1 million in a single day, so Tyler was very wealthy. In 2020, Pratt divorced his wife, but continued to stay in touch with his children. Despite what he did, people said he was a wonderful father. He never missed holidays or his children's birthdays. He was very attentive and spent all his free time with them. Tyler was around 40 when he met a woman named Jordan Romano in 2020. Jordan grew up in Ontario and was about 25 when she met Pratt. The woman made a living as an exotic dancer. Their romance developed quickly. Soon, Jordan quit her job because her boyfriend took over all her financial needs. The couple lived in luxury, designer clothes, expensive cars, costly trips, and the like. In the summer of 2020, Jordan and Tyler decided to start a life together. They got engaged and planned to marry soon, to create a full-fledged family. Most importantly, Tyler wanted to quit the illegal business, start living an honest life, and become a law-abiding businessman. Jordan said they just wanted to be a normal couple and get rid of the negativity associated with selling illegal substances. However, sooner or later, one has to pay for any sins. And in July 2020, fate brought Pratt together with Oliver Carafa. When Tyler was looking for an honest entrepreneur among his acquaintances to invest his money in, someone suggested he contact Oliver. The men arranged to meet for a business dinner to get to know each other better. Carafa was a very charming person and knew how to persuade. He spent the entire evening telling his new acquaintance about his grand plans, assuring him of the legality of his business, and boasting about his successes. At the end of the dinner, Oliver asked Tyler if he wanted to invest in one of his new ventures. In fact, Pratt was very impressed by the young man who had achieved remarkable heights in a short time. He was taken with the idea of a legitimate business and agreed to invest $170,000 at their first meeting, even though he had no idea what it was about. In reality, Oliver, learning that Tyler had a lot of money, made up a non-existent business on the spot and convinced him to invest. When Carafa returned home to Lucy after this meeting, he asked her to come up with a business to invest Tyler's money in. Oliver was tossing around various ideas, and one horrific thought came to mind. Since Carafa himself was from Eastern Europe, he could bring girls from there and find clients here in Canada. In other words, he wanted to invest Tyler's money in another underground and despicable business. Pratt would hardly have approved of his idea. Oliver shared his thoughts with his wife. Fortunately, Lucy had enough sense to dissuade her husband from such a venture, telling him it was the dumbest idea he'd ever had. In the end, Carafa decided to start a business selling personal protective equipment, which was especially popular during the pandemic. Protective masks, goggles, and gloves, everything used by hospital staff and ordinary citizens during the lockdown. Oliver planned to make a financial profit by buying these in-demand items at a low price and then selling them at a high markup to make a fortune. With his idea, Carafa went to Tyler and outlined all the advantages of the new venture. Tyler was thrilled and thought Oliver had struck gold. Pratt already considered Carafa his new best friend and business partner, but in reality, things were not so rosy. Jordan and Lucy also became friends and started spending a lot of time together. The families began meeting frequently, visiting each other's homes. Tyler adored his new partner so much that he gave him expensive jewelry for his birthday. The couples dined together, had dinners, and even planned a joint vacation in Italy. Carafa told Tyler that the business was going well, and they were selling personal protective equipment by the truckload. Profits were flowing in, but he needed more money to increase shipments. Pratt, inspired by being an honest investor now, didn't hesitate to give Oliver another $470,000. All transactions were done verbally. There were no official contracts between the two partners. The money was handed over informally, often over dinner. Tyler knew the new business was legal, so he wasn't worried. He was 99% confident in his new partner. But no one knew where the money actually went. Even Lucy didn't suspect what Oliver was really doing. She simply believed that all the money was being invested in personal protective equipment that was then shipped to Europe. A few months later, Tyler started asking questions. He asked where his share was and when he would see a return on his investments. Oliver explained to his partner that the money was in Europe and couldn't be easily withdrawn. It would take some time. He showed bank statements from European accounts. One of them had a balance of 12 million euros. Carafa convinced Tyler that 3 million of that was guaranteed for Pratt. This reassured the investor somewhat. Everything would have been fine, except the accounts Oliver showed his partner were fake. There were no 12 million euros in his accounts. Where the $640,000 Tyler had provided actually went remains a mystery. Whether the personal protective equipment business ever existed is also unknown. At least, it wasn't reported in the media. One thing is certain. At some point, Oliver lost all that money. Or perhaps it was nothing more than a simple scam from the start. Regardless of what really happened to the funds, Tyler returned to the issue of profits. He demanded the 3 million euros that Carafa had guaranteed him. But Oliver didn't have that kind of money. He didn't know what to do and, in desperation, turned to Lucy. He explained to his wife that he had lost the funds Pratt had provided for the business and didn't know how to get out of the situation. Lucy suggested buying time and wrote a check in Tyler's name for $1.5 million. This money was supposedly to be withdrawn from Lucy's mother's bank account. The girl assured her husband that Winnie wouldn't even notice the missing amount. Lucy thought the check scam would calm Tyler down and give them the time needed to find a real solution. It later turned out that the check was never cashed. The next step was another scam. Winnie, Lucy's mother, ran an insurance company, and the girl had spent enough time there to understand how it worked. Lucy told Pratt that she could arrange an insurance policy through her mother's firm to transfer money from Europe to Canada without paying taxes. Tyler and Jordan agreed to purchase a $1.5 million insurance policy, unaware that they were being deceived again. In reality, Lucy committed insurance fraud, simply keeping the money she received from her friends. Instead of finding a way out of the mess Oliver had created, Lucy made it even worse. It's unclear what these people were thinking or what they were hoping for. February 2021 arrived. Tyler was fed up with giving money and getting no return on his investments. He had bought the insurance policy from Lucy to try to speed up the process of transferring funds from Europe, but he still hadn't seen a cent. He realized that for some reason Oliver and Lucy were just stalling, so he warned his partner that if he didn't see the money by March 1st, they would have serious problems. Oliver panicked because he knew about Tyler's illegal business and assumed he might still have connections with dangerous people. Carafa turned to Lucy for advice again. The couple thought long and hard about how to get out of the situation. They didn't have enough money to settle with Tyler. That's when Oliver and Lucy decided they needed to end it once and for all. And that's when things took an even more horrific turn. On February 28, 2021, just one day before the deadline, Carafa invited his partner and his fiancée to a business meeting. The reason, supposedly, was a new business idea: to grow marijuana legally. Oliver had even found a large warehouse in an industrial park, the perfect place to implement his brilliant idea. He sketched out a business plan and assured Tyler that they could make much more money. Carafa claimed he had already arranged everything with a realtor, so he invited his partner to join him at the meeting to discuss it together. Pratt was intrigued and, unaware that it was all a big lie, that there was no realtor or business plan, agreed to the meeting. In reality, Carafa lured Tyler to the warehouse for a far more sinister reason. Earlier that day, Oliver had bought a car from his friend for cash. It was a white Audi Q5, and officially, the car had no connection to Carafa. Then Lucy obtained a SIM card registered to one of her friends to further cover their tracks. A few days before the set date, Oliver and Lucy exchanged various messages with each other, discussing Tyler and his fiancée, Jordan. In their correspondence, they also discussed the details of the sinister plan they were to carry out on the last day of winter. The couple even tried to encrypt their messages. So, on February 28, 2021, using the borrowed SIM card, Oliver sent Tyler a message, warning him that he and Lucy were just 10 minutes away from the warehouse. Meanwhile, Carafa and Lee drove to the empty hangar in the white Audi, turned around the corner of the building, and hid the car in a small dead end. Lucy, who was driving, wore a light-colored wig as a disguise in case the car was accidentally caught on surveillance cameras. Soon after, Tyler and his fiancée, Jordan Romano, also arrived at the warehouse in their Range Rover and pulled into the parking lot behind the building, where they were supposedly meeting the realtor. And that's when the alarming events began to unfold. Tyler got out of his car and was confused because his partner had arrived in an unfamiliar vehicle, and his wife, Lucy, was wearing a blonde wig for some reason. Pratt asked Carafa about the realtor they were supposed to meet. While the men talked near their cars, Lucy got into the Range Rover with Jordan and tried to distract her with conversation. Tyler's fiancée was also somewhat puzzled. She thought they would quickly inspect the rental space and then all go to a restaurant to grab a bite. Jordan was dressed for the occasion. She wore a light beige sweater and high-heeled shoes from a famous brand. However, Lucy looked unnatural. Usually, she dressed very stylishly, glamorously, and took every opportunity to emphasize her status with designer clothes. Now, in addition to the strange wig, she was wearing old sweatpants. It was all very suspicious, and Jordan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Recently, Romano had learned that she and Tyler were expecting a baby. She was now 13 weeks pregnant. This wasn't a secret from their friends, so what happened next took on an even more monstrous tone. At some point, stopping mid-sentence, Lucy opened the Range Rover's door and jumped out onto the street. At that moment, Jordan looked up at the men and saw Oliver pointing a gun directly at a bewildered Tyler's face. While Lucy distracted Jordan with her chatter, her husband had pulled out a weapon and was now holding Pratt at gunpoint. Before the pregnant woman could do anything, Oliver aimed the gun at her and pulled the trigger several times. The first 2 bullets missed, hitting the car. Jordan immediately shifted into gear and tried to drive away from the scene. Then Oliver fired a 3rd time. Unfortunately, this shot hit its target. The bullet struck the left side of her chest. It all happened in a matter of seconds. Tyler, standing a few meters away from Oliver, didn't even have time to react to what had just happened. When the man realized that his so-called friend and partner had just shot his pregnant fiancée, he lunged at him. But Oliver managed to turn around and, without aiming, started pulling the trigger. He shot at Tyler 5 or 6 times. Several bullets hit his arms, and one grazed his head. But the final shot, aimed directly at his chest, stopped him, and the man fell to the ground dead. Pregnant Jordan and Tyler saw Oliver and Lucy as friends. They trusted them implicitly. But it was all a lie. After this senseless attack, Carafa and Lee pulled Romano's body out of the Range Rover and left it on the roadside. They got into the car themselves and fled the scene. Their plan was to sell the SUV to make some money. So they took the vehicle to their friend's garage to have it dismantled for parts and sold, thus covering their tracks. After that, the perpetrators returned to the industrial park, walked past the motionless bodies of Jordan and Tyler, and got into the Audi. They took that car to the garage as well and had it dismantled for parts to avoid being traced. Oliver and Lucy returned home by taxi. The couple was in high spirits. The adrenaline was pumping. They had just committed the perfect crime, and there was no way they could ever be caught. The only thing they didn't know was that one of the victims was still alive. At 7:30 p.m., a truck was passing by the warehouse in the industrial park. The driver noticed something unusual on the ground. He stopped the truck and approached to see what had caught his attention. In the grass on the roadside, a woman lay motionless. She was covered in blood. Incredibly, after being shot in the heart, Jordan was still alive. She initially lost consciousness from the pain, but upon coming to, she continued to cling to life. With her last strength, the woman whispered to the driver that she had been shot and asked him to call an ambulance. Emergency services arrived at the scene immediately. Jordan Romano was taken to the hospital and sent for surgery. Naturally, after the report of a shooting, law enforcement officers were also dispatched to the scene. The police found Tyler's body nearby behind the warehouse. Unfortunately, after the shot to the chest, he died instantly. While the authorities were unsuccessfully trying to identify the perpetrators, as they had no idea who could have carried out the shooting. Oliver and Lucy sat at home in front of the TV, following the news. The husband and wife were proud of each other for pulling it off so easily. In one fell swoop, they got rid of all their debts and made some money from selling the 2 cars. But their joy vanished when the reporter covering the incident announced that one of the victims had survived and was currently in a coma. At that moment, Oliver and Lucy's triumph turned to panic. The news mentioned that the victim's condition had stabilized, and doctors hoped the patient would soon regain consciousness and be able to provide some comments about what happened. This meant their perfect plan had failed. Oliver and Lucy decided to flee Canada immediately. They flew to Eastern Europe just a day after the incident. After spending a few days in a hotel in Prague, the couple went to Slovakia to Oliver's parents. Meanwhile, the police began their investigation. The authorities did everything possible to track down those responsible for the crime. They started by checking cell tower data. They managed to trace the number from the SIM card Lucy had borrowed from her friend. The subscriber with that number was at the crime scene during the shooting. Identifying the real owner was easy. The unsuspecting girl had lent her spare SIM card, unaware of any crime. She honestly told the officers that she had given her extra SIM card to Lucy Lee. That's how the police got the names of the first suspects, Lucy Lee and her husband, Oliver Carafa. The next step was checking surveillance cameras, which captured the couple hurriedly leaving their apartment and heading to the airport, adding to the suspicions. Then evidence started piling up, one after another. The light-colored wig, parts of Lucy's clothing with bloodstains, documents related to the insurance scheme, and keys to the white Audi seen at the crime scene on cameras. The evidence against the couple was mounting, and 3 days after being in a coma, Jordan Romano woke up. The girl was confused and didn't immediately understand what had happened to her. Police officers had to deliver the heartbreaking news to Jordan. She had not only lost her fiancé, but also her unborn child. Recovering from the initial shock, Romano did everything she could to recall the events of that tragic day. An international arrest warrant was issued for 28-year-old Oliver and 25-year-old Lucy, who had fled the country. According to law enforcement, the couple spent some time in Slovakia with Carafa's parents, then visited the Czech Republic before disappearing in Budapest, Hungary. Lucy's mother, a well-known entrepreneur in Canada, reached out to the media and made a statement, saying she was shocked, alarmed, and puzzled by her daughter's involvement in this unfortunate incident. The woman publicly urged Lucy to cooperate with the police, but Oliver Carafa's parents reacted very differently when they learned that their son and daughter-in-law were suspected of committing a crime. The boy's father paid 250,000 euros to some people to hide Oliver and Lucy and provide them with new identification documents. That's how the criminal couple ended up in Hungary, where they hid for 2 months until the police caught up with them. Carafa and Lee were arrested and placed in a holding cell. Now they faced a lengthy extradition process to Canada. While Oliver protested against returning, insisting he be sent to his native Slovakia, Lucy spent a few days in a Hungarian prison and declared that it wasn't a 5-star hotel, so she needed to return to Canada immediately. The girl was unhappy with the hard bed, the clothes provided, the tasteless food, and the dreary environment. And when the authorities agreed to send her to Canada, Lucy threw a tantrum over the economy class seat. She demanded to be allowed to fly first class because her mother could afford a comfortable trip for her daughter. This was the height of audacity and cynicism. During questioning at the police station, where Lucy was taken straight from the plane, she refused to say anything, explaining that her mother and lawyer had forbidden her from speaking. Apparently, Lee hoped her mother's money would help her avoid conviction. The girl confidently stated that she was not guilty of anything. In their relationship, Oliver handled the finances. She didn't know how he dealt with his business problems and never cared to find out. Lucy and Oliver were set a bail of $2.7 million. The mother immediately paid the full amount, and the girl was released pending trial. Subsequently, Lucy violated the conditions of her bail, so she was taken back into custody and sent to jail. Meanwhile, Oliver, who was eventually extradited back to Canada, was denied bail altogether. He spent 2 years in prison awaiting trial. The court hearing began in April 2024. The trial lasted just over a month. Sitting in the dock, Lucy spun a wild, elaborate story about how she was forced to suffer because of her husband. She accused him of every sin imaginable, just to get herself off the hook. Lucy also tried to provide herself with an alibi, claiming she spent the entire day with her family, though no family member could confirm this. Her husband and accomplice, Oliver Carafa, refused to testify in court. The jury found Oliver and Lucy guilty on all charges. Both were sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Thoughts arise in a person's mind, not always good ones, not always smart ones, but everyone has them, and that's normal. For example, what would happen if you found yourself in the epicenter of a fire? What do people feel when they're a second away from death? What would happen if a person regained consciousness during surgery? What do pathologists feel? But these are just thoughts, aren't they? One day, a teenager had an unusual dream. A dream to find out how many blows with a stone it would take to kill a person. Unfortunately, the boy decided to turn his dream into reality, and his dark thoughts transformed into a true nightmare. And before we get started, be kind enough to support my channel. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and stay active. It will help a lot. I will be very grateful to you for that. Let's get started. Imagine you're sitting in cozy pajamas in your own home, all alone, leisurely scrolling through the internet. A steaming cup of tea sits on the table, with a plate of appetizing cookies nearby. You're looking forward to how you'll spend the day. Suddenly, a barely audible rustle comes from behind you. Panic grips you. You're alone at home. You cautiously turn your head, your heart skips a beat, then starts pounding twice as fast, because standing right behind you is a person dressed in all black, their face hidden under a mask, clutching a stone in their hand. They didn't come by chance. They came to make their dream a reality, to take your life. The serene picture of suburban life was brutally shattered when Pamela Vitale, radiating kindness and positivity, was found savagely beaten in her home. Her life, full of achievements and love, was unjustly cut short by a cruel crime that not only devastated her loved ones, but also shocked the entire community. This story began on the evening of October 15th, 2005, in the prestigious suburb of Lafayette, located about 30 kilometers east of San Francisco. That day, a man named Daniel Horowitz returned home after a long workday, not quite home, but to his property. Daniel and his wife Pamela were in the process of building their dream mansion. It was to be an estate atop a hill in Hanner Canyon. Pamela oversaw the entire project, drawing up plans for the workers, designing the layout, and choosing materials. Since the house itself was still under construction, the couple lived on the same property in a 2-story trailer. So Daniel Horowitz pulled up to their residence at 6 p.m. and immediately noticed that his wife's car was parked outside. This was strange because she had planned to attend a ballet that evening, but apparently, for some reason, she changed her plans. The man opened the trunk, grabbed the grocery bags, and headed toward the front door, but froze in his tracks. A pool of blood was spreading across the porch outside the trailer. Daniel realized something terrible had happened. As soon as he pushed the door open, his worst fears were confirmed. His wife, Pamela, covered in blood, lay on the floor in a fetal position, almost at the very exit. Although it was clear at first glance that the woman was dead, Daniel couldn't help but check. Clinging to a faint spark of hope, he bent over her body and tried to find a pulse. Her heart wasn't beating. Of course, Daniel hadn't expected to come home to such a horrific scene, though Horowitz sometimes encountered similar things in his line of work. In that moment, he was terrified, panicked, and immediately called 911. While speaking with the dispatcher, he finally realized that Pamela was gone. He sank to his knees beside her and began saying things he rarely said in life. Daniel sobbed and whispered how much he loved her. He asked who would now live in their dream house. He was furious, unable to comprehend who could have done this to his wife. He wept and shouted, "No, Pamela, no," and that heart-wrenching cry echoed through the canyon. People who heard it said that in that moment, Daniel sounded like a wounded animal. Pamela Vitale Horowitz was born on January 11, 1953 in Texas, but spent much of her youth in Minneapolis. Her loved ones described her as the kindest, most generous, and most selfless woman. She met her first husband, Mario, in London while working as a flight attendant. They started dating, then married, and had 2 children, a son, Mario Jr., and a daughter, Marisa. Unfortunately, over time, their relationship fell apart, and the couple divorced. Pamela, left alone with 2 children, wasn't going to mourn her failed marriage. She decided to start life anew, and in 1978, she packed all the essentials into the trunk, put the kids in the car, and drove to California. Pamela had no concrete plans for the future. She just wanted a change of scenery to see what would come of it. While in California, Pamela got a job as an accountant, then studied filmmaking at the University of California, Los Angeles, and completed an internship that allowed her to become an independent producer. As she began her career as a producer, Pamela met Daniel Horowitz through her sister. This was 12 years before her death. Daniel was a lawyer and once decided to try his hand at writing. He was working on a case that he later wanted to turn into a film script. While looking for a producer, he met Pamela Vitale through mutual friends. From that first meeting, when Daniel saw this woman, he stopped thinking about the script and thought only of her. Sometime later, they married. By 2005, the Horowitz family was quite successful financially. Daniel became a well-known lawyer and legal expert. He often appeared on various cable news channels as a legal commentator on high-profile cases, making him well-known to the public. Pamela worked for a while as an executive at Infomix, but later began assisting Daniel at his law firm. The Horowitzes were not just husband and wife, they were best friends. As one friend put it, others could only dream of such a relationship. The Horowitzes were a strong couple. Everything was going well for them. They loved each other, were building their dream home, and planned to grow old together. But someone decided that Pamela had lived long enough in this world. On Saturday morning, October 15, 2005, 52-year-old Pamela Vitale was working at home on her computer. She was dressed casually in a long t-shirt and slippers. It was a perfectly ordinary morning. She brewed herself some tea and placed it on the table nearby. Around 11 a.m., she heard a noise behind her, turned, and nearly collided with a person in a mask. She immediately realized the stranger had come with ill intentions when she saw the sharp stone in their hand. Pamela tried to run. She rushed toward the trailer's exit, but her pursuer caught up and tried to knock her down. She fell onto a large television screen, pushing it several meters. By this time, she was already bleeding heavily. A red mark was left on the TV, and near the front door, blood was smeared, with a footprint near the door handle. It seemed Pamela had tried to kick the door open to call for help, but she wasn't given the chance. The attack continued. The assailant and the trailer's occupant engaged in an unequal struggle. Pamela fought for her life until the very end. Her foot bore not only her blood, but also the blood of the attacker. Apparently, at some point, she managed to strike him hard and cause pain. Despite Pamela striking his face and resisting with all her strength, she was ultimately beaten unconscious. Her nose was broken, several teeth were knocked out, and her skull was so severely fractured that it caused internal bleeding. Her scalp was nearly torn off, and then, when Pamela could no longer move, her stomach was slashed open, she was turned over, and an unknown symbol was carved into her back. After the assault, the attacker remained in the trailer for a significant period. It would have taken just 5 minutes to take the woman's life. The assailant was in no hurry, likely knowing no one would show up for hours. He calmly drank a glass of water, then took a shower. His bloody traces and fingerprints were found in Pamela's bathroom, as well as on the counter and the glass of water. After cleaning himself up, the attacker disemboweled her stomach and carved that strange symbol on the homeowner's back. Then he walked around the trailer and finally left the house, leaving Pamela to die alone. This was the timeline of events investigators pieced together after examining the crime scene and the woman's body. Detectives meticulously reconstructed Pamela's final hours, searching for clues among mundane details. Experts were able to collect DNA from the sole of the victim's foot and from under her toenails. While Pamela was being killed, her husband Daniel was preparing for a court case. Ironically, he was working on a case involving a woman who had killed her romantic partner and then claimed self-defense. He later withdrew from the case because he was grieving for his untimely departed wife. But in any case, he had an alibi for the time of the crime, so it wasn't hard for the police to verify. That day, Daniel left the house around 8 a.m. During his lunch break, he called Pamela, but she didn't pick up. This wasn't unusual, as his wife often spent time outside, leaving her phone at home. After finishing his work, he bought groceries and headed home, where he stumbled upon his wife's lifeless body. As soon as Daniel called the police, reporters and curious onlookers appeared at the house in no time. Everyone was discussing the same questions. What happened? Who sent Pamela Vitale to the other side? Could her lawyer husband have orchestrated the attack, since in many cases when a woman dies, her partner is responsible? The situation did look suspicious. How did the attacker get into the trailer? Perhaps Pamela let him in herself, meaning it was someone she knew well. It's unlikely she would have walked around in just a t-shirt in front of a stranger. The attack was deeply personal. A random person simply wouldn't have had a motive, as there was no robbery or sexual assault. Nevertheless, the police ruled Daniel Horowitz out of the suspect list because he had an alibi. He bore no direct responsibility, but Daniel was a lawyer, and the attack on his wife could have been connected to his work. Perhaps one of his dissatisfied clients or their relatives attacked his wife to hurt him or get revenge. Then investigators turned their attention to a neighbor with whom the Horowitz family had strained relations. Daniel had even considered filing a restraining order against this person, but the issue was later resolved peacefully. The neighbors managed to bury the hatchet, so this person was also ruled out as a suspect. While the police followed these leads, Pamela's friends and loved ones had to say their final goodbyes. They held a private memorial service in a memorial park. It was on that day of mourning and remembrance that the sheriff called a press conference to make a statement. The police made an arrest on October 20th, 2005, 5 days after the attack. The detained individual was only 16 years old, turning 17 in 2 weeks. The young man's name was Scott Daleski, and he was indirectly acquainted with the Horowitz couple. Daniel, as a lawyer, had helped Scott's family with some legal matters. Scott Edgar Daleski was born in San Francisco, California in 1988, and, as people said, he didn't have the best childhood. His parents divorced a couple of years after his birth. The boy stayed with his mother, Esther, who faced significant financial difficulties. For a short period, Scott had a stepfather. However, he couldn't get along with Scott's mother, and the woman found herself in a difficult situation again. Apparently, Esther wasn't a very good mother, as Scott's biological father twice contacted a child protection agency, asking them to take action regarding his ex-wife. He described her as neglectful, emotionally unstable, and at times even aggressive. but no specific measures were taken regarding this request. However, it's not entirely fair to judge a woman left alone with a child and struggling financially while Scott's father lived in his own house and had a stable job. What stopped him from taking his son and raising him? So both the mother and father failed to give their son proper attention and were equally to blame for him straying from the right path. Once again left without support, Esther, Scott's mother, turned to friends who owned a plot of land down the hill from where Daniel and Pamela lived. Esther's friends were also building a house and living in a trailer, but they took pity on the desperate woman and allowed her and her son to stay in a cabin on their property for a while. The cabin was entirely unfit for living. There was no bathroom or kitchen, but they had no choice. Besides, it was a temporary solution. Esther still didn't have money to rent proper housing, so she and her son settled on their friend's property until they finished building their house. Despite all the hardships he faced in childhood, Scott Dileski grew up as a good kid. He was a Boy Scout, played sports, and when it came to school, he did fairly well academically. That was until he became a teenager. The teenage years are one of the most unpredictable periods in anyone's life. But in Scott's life, a tragic event occurred that deeply affected his worldview. His sister died in a car accident, and she wasn't the only person in the car who succumbed to injuries. Their car was hit by a driver who had intended to take his own life. As a result, he sent several innocent people to their deaths, but survived himself. This incredibly traumatic event caused significant damage to Dileski's fragile psyche. From an ordinary cheerful boy, Scott turned into a gloomy, withdrawn teenager overnight. He began avoiding people and became fascinated with goth culture. He dyed his dark brown hair black, started wearing black clothing and a long coat, and developed a fascination with stories about serial killers. Those who knew Dileski said he seemed more like a harmless eccentric than a dangerous goth. However, despite his unusual appearance, most people considered Scott a kind, gentle, and tender kid. He might dress strangely, listen to more aggressive music than other teens, or have unconventional hobbies, but Dileski rarely got into trouble. He voluntarily helped and cared for people, unlike most other teenagers. He didn't even wear leather because he loved animals. That's how neighbors and teachers saw him. But sometimes, some people love animals while hating humans. In reality, Scott was a teenager filled with negative, sometimes dangerous fantasies. This was reflected in his drawings and writings, where he practically cried out for help, but his cries went unheard. In one essay titled "Living for Slaughter," Dileski wrote that he was raised in hatred and would now hate because he lived to take someone's life. According to Scott himself, he tried marijuana at 11 and later experimented with various illegal substances to see their effects. But his mother insisted she never saw her son drunk or under the influence of drugs. So it's possible the boy was just trying to make himself seem tougher to the police and made up stories. During his teenage years, Scott stopped caring about school. He dropped out, hoping to later pass exams and enroll in college to take art courses. But he never followed through. The most alarming sign was what he searched for on his computer: practices of dissecting animal and human bodies for organ harvesting. This single interest revealed more about the teenager's inner world than his outward appearance. In 2005, Scott and his friend decided to start selling marijuana to make money. They planned to set up a small grow operation in a closet in Scott's room, equipping it with lighting. But growing plants required special equipment, which cost money they didn't have. Since the area they lived in was fairly affluent, the teens decided to break into homes and steal not cash or bank cards, but confidential information to fund their small business later. They simply copied card details from bills to make online purchases. Their first priority was special grow lights. Scott placed an order using a stolen credit card, but mistakenly listed 2 different addresses for billing and shipping. The lighting equipment company refused to process the order, suspecting fraud. Soon, a woman called the police, reporting that her credit card information had been stolen. She checked her statement and saw a purchase she hadn't made. According to the statement, Someone had ordered special grow lights to a neighboring house. Strangely, the billing address was the home of a woman named Esther, while the shipping address was her neighbor Pamela Vitale's house. The woman spoke with both ladies, but neither had any idea what was going on. Esther returned home and, just to be safe, checked her son's computer. All the data had been wiped, and she immediately realized Scott had something to do with the credit card scheme. After much questioning, the boy admitted he had broken into a house and copied credit card information. But he wasn't alone. Scott immediately turned in his friend. Instead of going to the police to resolve the situation, Esther told her son to get rid of the evidence. Then she called the parents of Scott's friend and told them everything so they could talk to their son. In the end, Scott's friend confessed to his parents not only about the credit card scheme, but also that Dileski had planned to kill Pamela Vitale. After such a confession, the friend's parents couldn't stand by and went to the police station with their son. Scott's friend admitted they often discussed various methods of killing. Dileski believed beating someone with a club would be best. Though it would take longer, it would be more painful for the victim. After all, a gunshot would kill someone instantly, and they wouldn't realize they were dying. After telling the detectives everything, the boy received immunity, meaning he wouldn't be held accountable as an accomplice. Investigators immediately went to the Dileski home to arrest Scott. But Scott wasn't home. His mother, Esther, insisted to the officers that she didn't know where her son was. After hours of questioning, Esther finally confessed where Scott was hiding. They found and arrested him. 53-year-old Esther was also taken into custody for destroying evidence. A backpack containing a hard drive with information about accounts and numbers of people Scott had stolen from. One of the names was Pamela Vitale's. To get rid of the evidence, Esther simply burned it. Detectives also learned that Scott wasn't home during the attack on Pamela. That evening, his mother called his cell phone and told him to stay away because the area was crawling with police. Ultimately, the charges against Esther were dropped once she agreed to cooperate with the investigation and provide truthful testimony. For the woman who had turned 50, her grown son was the meaning of her life. Esther lived for Scott and did everything to protect him, even though she knew she was breaking the law. Perhaps realizing she had acted wrongly or fearing she would face trial herself, she told the detectives about the backpack and some of the items in it. Then Esther handed over blood-stained boots, a glove, and other clothing splattered with dark stains. These were substantial pieces of evidence and played a significant role in the case. Esther herself tried to convince the police that she didn't realize she was helping her son hide serious evidence related to Pamela Vitale's murder. She thought it was just related to the credit card fraud. After Scott's arrest, they found several sheets of paper hidden in his dresser. In Dileski's handwriting, as established, information about various people's accounts was written. Among the papers was one that caused the most concern: a handwritten plan for kidnapping someone. It stated that the victim should first be knocked out, then held captive. Then certain conditions should be met, evidence destroyed, and possibly the captive killed. The trial dragged on. Initially, Scott was represented by attorney Thomas McKenna, whom Scott later asked to be removed from the case. It turned out that this lawyer had defended the driver responsible for the 2002 car accident that killed Scott's sister and others in the car. Dileski had to hire a new defense attorney. By the time the trial finally began, Scott looked entirely different. He did his best to change his appearance, becoming much neater. He wore a starched shirt, and his long hair was cut short. The goal of these changes was to present him to the jury as an innocent teenager who wouldn't hurt a fly. This was the defense's tactic, as Scott genuinely didn't plead guilty. Though there was plenty of evidence against Dileski in this case, one piece was the most critical: Scott's blood on the victim's foot. As mentioned earlier, Pamela fought desperately for her life and struck her attacker in the face with her foot several times, breaking his nose. On October 15, 2005, Scott woke up early and went for a walk, as he claimed, to see a waterfall near the house, then return home, shower, and visit his girlfriend. But the so-called walk went wrong from the start, as he came home battered. It was immediately clear he had been struck in the face multiple times. There was a cut on Scott's nose that was bleeding, and his nose was swollen. A fresh bruise was forming under his eye, and his wrist was sore. It seemed like a sprain. At home, Doleski said he got these injuries during the walk. By the way, the marks on his face and body were still visible when he was arrested. The young man told his mother and housemates an incredible story about how he set out in high spirits to admire the waterfall. Everything was fine until a frantic, clearly frightened woman blocked his path. She grabbed his arm, scratching him, and started saying something, repeating the same phrase over and over. She shouted, "I can't believe this is really happening." When the young man tried to break free, she punched him in the face, then started slapping him so hard that his nose bled. It's unclear how Scott's family reacted to this, but a few days after the attack on Pamela Vitale, Doleski confessed to a friend that the woman he met during that walk was Pamela. Now he feared the police would question him about her murder because his DNA might be at the crime scene. After all, the crazy neighbor had scratched his face, and bits of his skin could be under her nails. Undoubtedly, he was right. His DNA was indeed found at the scene, not only in the blood trail, but also on Pamela's foot. The examination confirmed that the foot had not only the victim's blood, but also the attacker's. The DNA matched Doleski's. Additionally, on the clothing his mother turned over, boots, a black glove, a navy ski mask, and a black t-shirt, they found blood belonging to Pamela Vitale. Another piece of evidence was the symbol carved on the back of the deceased woman. Scott used a similar symbol to sign his dark writings. The only thing investigators couldn't determine was the real motive for the crime, though the prosecution doesn't necessarily need to prove motive. But its presence would have clarified the defendant's intentions to the jury and helped them make the right decision. Establishing the motive behind such a barbaric act was as difficult as it was important. At Scott Doleski's trial, various hypotheses clashed, from the defendant's mental disorder to the mistaken identification of the victim. The forensic examination became a silent witness to Pamela's final moments, while psychological studies tried to penetrate Scott's mind. Both the prosecution and defense used various theories to unravel the complex web of motives that drove the young man to murder. The defense capitalized on the lack of motive, arguing that Scott didn't do it because he simply had no reason to. When the killer was taking Pamela's life, the teenager was at home, meaning someone else was responsible for the murder. As evidence, the defense pointed out that in addition to Pamela's and Doleski's DNA, an unidentified person's DNA was also found, but this didn't sway the jury. Doleski's behavior and actions were compared to notorious killers like John Wayne Gacy, Ted Bundy, and Scott Peterson. Like them, the boy wore a mask of a happy person, hiding all that darkness inside. Even the judge said Scott tried to follow in the footsteps of his hero, Jack the Ripper, because he was fascinated by what was inside the human body. After 18 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict on the now 17-year-old Scott Doleski. He was found guilty of first-degree murder against Pamela Vitale, and since he was only 16 at the time of the crime, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Due to the defendant's age, the death penalty wasn't considered. Pamela's husband, Daniel Horowitz, a lawyer, had represented about 50 different criminals in his career. They were all far from the best representatives of humanity. Each had some reason to take another person's life, but Scott Doleski simply enjoyed taking lives, striking blows, and reveling in the result. This teenager was the only one who showed absolutely no remorse. But what can you do when Scott lacked proper parental upbringing? His mother, Esther, who initially hid physical evidence and then turned it over to the police, insisting she didn't understand its significance, saw Pamela's daughter, Marisa, at the trial. She began crying, because the young woman was the spitting image of her deceased mother. The question immediately arose. Did Esther truly know what her son had done and, by hiding the blood-stained clothes, want to help him? But then, when backed into a corner, she changed her mind and began cooperating with the investigation. Now Esther will long be haunted by Pamela Vitale's final moments, running through the trailer hoping to escape, and her own son Scott, striking blow after blow on the innocent woman's body. Is the mother to blame for her son's upbringing? Most likely, seeing a quiet, calm child, Esther had no idea what horrific fantasies were brewing in his mind. The only time Scott showed any emotion at the trial was during the display of autopsy photos. He leaned forward, his mouth open in astonishment. Dileski was clearly admiring his work, what he had done to poor Pamela. After the verdict was delivered, Scott was returned to a juvenile facility, where he remained until he turned 18, then transferred to prison. Dileski filed several appeals against his sentence, claiming his rights were violated, but all appeals were denied. Although Scott was initially sentenced to life without parole, in 2018, his sentence was reduced to 25 years in prison after California passed a new law. This gave juveniles sentenced to life without parole a chance at release in the future. So now Scott could be released in 2030. In prison, Dileski has been a model inmate. He managed to earn a college degree and is now simply waiting for the opportunity to apply for parole. But the inmate's good behavior won't help Pamela's family and close friends cope with the fact that they'll have to live the rest of their lives without her. Daniel Horowitz never moved into the dream mansion he planned to share with his wife. In the end, he sold the land along with the partially built house and tried to move on as best he could, but he'll still have to spend his old age without the woman he loved, around whom all his hopes and dreams were built. And all because of a cruel boy who lived nearby and dreamed of finding out how many blows with a stone it would take to kill a person. So should we fear our bad thoughts or desires? After all, sooner or later, they have a way of coming true. If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video.